Hey guys, tonight we slip into soft leather sandals and wander through the echoing corridors of Constantinople, where the air smells faintly of sea salt, hot wax, and old parchment. You stand at the edge of the imperial capital, the Bosporus glittering behind you, and ahead rises a city that runs not just on ambition and incense, but on paperwork. Stacks of scrolls travel through archways like obedient little soldiers. Ink-stained clerks hurry past, clutching documents that could decide the fate of entire provinces. Somewhere inside these walls, a bureaucrat is sharpening a reed pen with the intensity of a general preparing for battle. And you, brave soul, are about to join them. You probably won't survive this, at least, not without developing a permanent cramp in your writing hand. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're re-listening from and what your local time is. I love seeing how far these late-night journeys travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the bronze gates and into the beating administrative heart of the Constantinople. Founded in 330 CE by Constantine the Great, this city is not just Rome's eastern twin, it is a filing cabinet with sea views. The empire that calls itself Roman, but speaks mostly Greek, stretches from the Balkans to bits of Italy, from Anatolia down toward Syria, and every inch of it generates reports. Taxes owed, troops stationed, bridges repaired, complaints about goats trespassing on imperial land. You think modern email inboxes are overwhelming? Imagine waiting 3 months for a donkey caravan to deliver bad news in triplicate. A senior clerk, his beard forked neatly like he's trying to look authoritative but approachable, presses a wax tablet into your hands. It's warm from the sun and already crowded with tiny shorthand marks. "Practice," he murmurs, as if this is a sacred rite. In a way, it is. The Byzantine Empire survives not just because of its walls, though the Theodosian walls are famously formidable, but because of its paperwork. Mainstream historians agree that the empire's sophisticated bureaucracy allowed it to outlast the western half of the Roman Empire by nearly 1,000 years. While the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 CE, the eastern half kept calmly filing reports until 1453. That's a lot of receipts. You shuffle into a long hall lined with wooden desks. The sound is hypnotic. Scratch, scratch, pause, sigh, scratch again. It's almost soothing, like a medieval ASMR session. Reed pens dip into ink made from soot and gum arabic. Parchment crackles softly. A clerk to your left mutters the tax rates of a distant province under his breath, committing them to memory. He smells faintly of olive oil and anxiety. Your job, at least for today, is simple. Incoming scrolls arrive from the province's places with lyrical names like Bithynia and Cappadocian. You log them. Date received. Origin, subject, urgency. If it's marked with a particular seal, it goes to a higher desk. If it lacks a seal, you raise an eyebrow and pass it to someone who specializes in suspicion. In this empire, paranoia is practically an administrative department. You unroll one report describing grain shipments from Egypt. Egypt, even under Byzantine control, remains the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Grain supply is serious business. Constantinople's population, which at its height may have reached 500,000, depends on steady imports. Historians still argue whether those population figures are exaggerated by medieval chroniclers trying to impress us or themselves. But either way, that's a lot of mouths to feed. No grain, no happy citizens. No happy citizens, no calm emperor. Speaking of emperors, you haven't seen him yet. He exists somewhere deep in the palace complex, surrounded by silk curtains and ceremonial guards. But even he is bound by documents. An imperial order doesn't become real until it's written, copied, sealed, and recorded. In a sense, ink outranks everyone. You glance at a peculiar note appended to a tax register, a tiny doodle of a fish wearing what appears to be a crown. A board clerk's rebellion, perhaps. It's a quirky reminder that behind all this solemn administration are very human people. In fact, one fringe tidbit whispered among modern scholars suggests that some bureaucrats developed elaborate personal shorthand, symbols almost like secret emojis, to speed up their work. Whether that's efficiency or the medieval version of texting abbreviations, you can't help but admire the creativity. As the afternoon light slants through high windows, illuminating dust motes that drift like lazy comets, you realize something important. This empire is a machine, not a roaring, clanking machine, but a murmuring one. Its gears are scrolls, its oil is ink. Its operators are men and occasionally women, though you don't know that yet, who believe deeply in order. A bell rings softly somewhere in the complex. Another batch of documents arrives, tied with cord. You take a breath and reach for the top scroll. It smells faintly of travel horse sweat and distant rain. Somewhere far beyond these marble halls, a farmer, a soldier, or a minor official dictated the words now resting in your hands. And here you are, the quiet middle link in a vast chain connecting emperor to peasant. You smooth the parchment carefully. No smudges, no mistakes. In this world, a misplaced word can mean an extra tax or an accidental rebellion. No pressure. You dip your pen into ink and begin to write, the scratch of reed against skin joining the steady chorus around you. Outside, the Bosporus continues to shimmer, indifferent to your growing stack of assignments. Inside, the Empire hums along one carefully filed document at a time. And just like that, you're part of it, ink-stained. Slightly overwhelmed, mildly amused, very, very awake, in a world that will eventually ask you to copy the same decree 12 times. Settle in. Your hand is going to get a workout. You drift deeper into the palace complex, your fingers still faintly smudged with ink, and the corridors narrow into quieter, more guarded spaces. The hum of the outer offices fades behind you, replaced by the softer, more deliberate scratch of pens belonging to people who know they're close to power. This is the administrative core of the great Palace de Nerve Center, where decisions are shaped into sentences, and sentences are shaped into destiny. The Great Palace of Constantinople isn't just one building. It's a sprawling labyrinth of courtyards, reception halls, chapels, and, most importantly for you, offices. The Byzantines call some of these administrative hubs, the secreta, literally, secrets. It sounds dramatic, but mostly it means rooms where men argue quietly about grain quotas. You pass beneath a mosaic of a haloed emperor flanked by angels, and you try not to drip ink on the polished marble floor. A senior official, thin, hawk-nosed, draped in silk that whispers as he walks, gestures you inside a chamber lined with wooden shelves. Each shelf is stacked with scrolls bound in colored cords, red for tax matters, blue for military dispatches, yellow for ecclesiastical correspondence. It's basically the medieval version of color-coded email folders, except if you misplace one, you might destabilize Anatolia. Here sit the imperial secretaries, men trained to draft decrees in a tone that is both majestic and mildly terrifying. They serve under powerful offices like the Magister Officiorum, the Master of Offices, a role that historically oversaw palace administration, the imperial guard, and even foreign envoys. It's one of those Byzantine titles that sounds ceremonial until you realize it controls half the government. Mainstream historians agree that the office was crucial in coordinating imperial bureaucracy, especially in late antiquity, acting as a kind of administrative spider at the center of a very tidy web. You're assigned a desk near the back wall, close enough to observe, but far enough that no one expects brilliance from you yet. A stack of draft edicts waits, written in careful Greek minuscule script. Your task is to compare copies. Every decree must exist in multiple forms, one for the archives, one for dispatch, one for provincial posting, and sometimes one, just in case, the first three mysteriously vanish. Paranoia, again comforting. Really, as you work, you notice how formulaic the language is. By the grace of God, emperor and autocrat of the Romans. It begins every single time. There's no room for casual phrasing. You won't find, "Hey guys, quick update from the throne." Even a minor adjustment to harbor fees gets wrapped in layers of divine authority. Historians still argue whether this elaborate ceremonial language genuinely reinforced imperial power, or if it was mostly bureaucratic inertia, one daring to simplify what had always been ornate. A clerk beside you leans over and whispers, "Count the verbs." You blink. Apparently, in certain types of decrees, the number of verbs must align with traditional patterns. It's less mystical than it sounds, more stylistic consistency, but the effect feels oddly ritualistic. You count them carefully, resisting the urge to add one just to see what happens. You enjoy employment, after all. At the front of the chamber stands a large wooden desk carved with vines and eagles. This is where final drafts await the emperor's review. The emperor himself might not scrutinize every line contrary to dramatic imagination. He doesn't personally proofread every grain shipment, but the presence of that desk changes the atmosphere. Every scribe sits a little straighter. Every comma well, equivalent punctuation. Mark Maters, you rehanded a wax seal bearing the imperial emblem, a cross, an imperial insignia pressed into crimson wax. Seals are everything here. Without a proper seal, a document is just a fancy opinion. With it, armies move, taxes rise, governors tremble, the wax smells faintly sweet as it softens over a small flame. You press the seal carefully and lift it, revealing a crisp impression. It's strangely satisfying, like stamping approval on a cosmic permission slip. There's a quirky rumor circulating among the clerks. One former secretary supposedly trained his parrot to mimic the opening lines of imperial edicts. Imagine a bird squawking by the grace of God whenever someone entered the room. Whether true or exaggerated, it's a comforting thought that even in this sea of solemnity, someone once found time for feathered comedy. Midday light filters through high windows, illuminating dust and the occasional drifting scrap of parchment. A messenger bursts in, slightly out of breath, delivering a dispatch from a provincial governor. The ribbon is crooked, the wax is cracked. Immediately, 3 officials lean in. Was it tampered with, or just dropped in a puddle? You observe how swiftly suspicion becomes procedure. The document is logged, examined, copied, and annotated before anyone even reads its content in full. This layering of process is not accidental. The Byzantine state thrives on redundancy. If one official errs, another catches it. If one archive burns, heathen, forbid another copy may survive. It's tedious, yes, but it's also why this empire endures invasions, plagues, and theological arguments that could make your head spin. You stretch your fingers and glance at the growing pile beside you. The rhythm is becoming familiar. Read, compare, correct, seal, stack. There's a comfort in repetition, a low, steady pulse beneath the grandeur. You begin to sense that the palace isn't just a place of dramatic pronouncements and jeweled crowns. It's a factory of legitimacy. Somewhere beyond these walls, generals drill soldiers and merchants haggle in markets. But here, in these quiet chambers, the empire is defined line by line. You dip your pen again, steady now, and copy the next decree with measured strokes. Outside, gulls cry over the Bosporus. Inside, the secret rooms hum on, faithful and methodical. You're no longer just visiting. You re-part of the sacred desks. Now another pair of hands in the endless choreography of Byzantine order. The next morning, though, morning is generous, because you fairly sure the sun hasn't fully committed. Yet you find yourself seated beside a row of men whose fingers move so fast they almost blur. These are the notari, the professional shorthand scribes of the empire, and you quickly realize that you're careful. Plotting script from yesterday would make them weep softly into their inkpots. A senior notary with sharp eyes and a permanently arched eyebrow slides a wax tablet toward you. Instead of full words, it's filled with tight, looping symbols that look like someone tried to write Greek while riding a galloping horse. Tachygraphy, he says, tapping the tablet. Speed writing. You nod as if you totally knew that. The Byzantine shorthand system descends from earlier Roman practices, and mainstream historians confirm that notaries were trained to capture speeches, court proceedings, and imperial audiences in real time. When the emperor speaks, whether issuing a tax reform or gently reminding a general not to lose Syria, against someone must record every syllable. There's no pause button. No, sorry, could you repeat that? The notarius listens, writes, and somehow keeps up. You're invited to observe a practice session. A junior official stands at the front of the room and reads aloud a mock decree in an exaggeratedly grand voice. The notari lean forward, reads poised. The moment he begins, their hands erupt into motion scratch, 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 barely lifting from the wax. It's mesmerizing. You try to follow along on your own tablet and manage approximately 4 words before falling tragically behind. If this were a sport, you would not be making the team. Historians still argue whether Byzantine shorthand was standardized across the empire, or varied significantly between regions and offices. Some evidence suggests that different administrative centers developed their own conventions, which must have made interdepartmental collaboration a delight. Imagine borrowing someone else's notes and realizing they're basically written in hieroglyphics. fun, your mentor for the week is a patient, slightly stooped notarius named Theodoros. He smells faintly of ink and time. He explains that shorthand is essential during imperial audiences, especially when foreign envoys present petitions. Nothing can be lost. If an ambassador from the Abbasid Caliphate makes a veiled threat wrapped in poetry, someone needs to record it accurately, preferably without accidentally turning mutual respect into inevitable doom. You practice the symbols for common phrases. By the grace of God, imperial command, tax exemption. There are shortcuts for frequently used words, and you can't help but think of modern text abbreviations. Oh my God becomes BGG, by God's grace. Somewhere, a medieval bureaucrat is inventing the original shorthand memes, their goodness. A quirky story whispered among the desks. One legendary notarius supposedly recorded an entire 3-hour theological debate without once looking down at his tablet. He just listened and let his hand fly. When asked how he managed it, he reportedly said, "I find doctrinal disputes soothing." You suspect sarcasm existed even then. In the afternoon, you're permitted to sit in on a minor court proceeding. A property dispute between two landowners. Nothing dramatic, no swords drawn, just a disagreement about olive trees and boundaries. The presiding official listens while the notary crouched nearby, capturing every claim and counterclaim. The air smells of wax and faint impatience. This is where you see the true power of their work. Once recorded, the words become evidence. The written account can be archived, referenced, cited in future disputes. In an empire that prizes continuity, the past lives on in ink. Mainstream scholarship emphasizes that Byzantine legal culture depended heavily on documentation. Oral agreements mattered less than what could be produced from a chest of scrolls 20 years later. You try your hand at transcribing a brief exchange. Your symbols wobble, uneven, and overly large. Theodoros gently corrects your form, guiding your fingers. Economy of motion, he murmurs. The hand must glide. You nod solemnly, as if he's imparting ancient martial arts wisdom rather than teaching you how to abbreviate Olive Grove. There's a rhythm to the room, the speaker's voice rising and falling, the steady scratching of styluses, the occasional throat clearing. You feel yourself settling into it, almost hypnotized. This isn't dramatic warfare or glittering ceremony. It's quieter, but it's foundational. Without accurate records, edicts could be misremembered, taxes misapplied, punishments misjudged. You glance at a finished transcript being transferred from wax to parchment. The shorthand is carefully expanded into full script, polished and formal. It's like watching rough notes transform into official reality. What began as frantic scratches becomes a clean, authoritative document ready for sealing. As dusk creeps through the high windows, casting long shadows across the desks, your wrist aches pleasantly. You've managed to keep pace for an entire short speech without completely derailing progress. Theodoros gives you a rare, approving nod. In this world, that's basically a standing ovation. Flex your fingers and look around at the nimble hands still dancing across wax. These scribes may never wear armor or command ships, but they capture the Empire's voice. They are its memory keepers, its quiet guardians of accuracy. And now, you're learning to move just a little faster, to listen just a little closer, to let your pen fly with confidence. The words of emperors, governors, and argumentative olive farmers pass through your hands briefly before settling into the vast ordered stillness of the archive. Not bad for someone who, yesterday, could barely keep up with a color-coded scroll. Your fingers are still tingling from yesterday's shorthand marathon when you re-ushered into a smaller, warmer chamber. It smells strongly of melted wax and a faint hint of suspicion. If the notary capture words this room decides whether those words are trustworthy, welcome to the world of seals, cords, and bureaucratic paranoia where trust is good, but verification is divine. A long wooden table dominates the center of the room. Upon it sit shallow bronze dishes filled with soft red and green wax, each gently heated over small charcoal braziers. The scent is oddly sweet, almost comforting, like a festive candle leaf. Festive candles determine the fate of provinces. Beside the wax rest metal seal, matrices engraved with imperial symbols, crosses, monograms, double-headed eagles, you're told not to touch them casually, which of course makes you want to touch them immediately. Seals are serious business in the Byzantine Empire. A document without a proper seal is little more than an ambitious suggestion. A sealed document, however, carries the weight of imperial authority. Mainstream historians point out that Byzantine administrative culture relied heavily on sealing practices, both for authenticity and security. Lead seals, called bulla, were commonly attached to folded documents and stamped with official insignia. Wax seals were also used, especially for internal palace documents. In either case, breaking one without authorization could land you in very uncomfortable conversations. You're handed a folded parchment. The outer side bears a faint crease where a cord once held it closed. Tampered? The supervising official murmurs. He is a compact man with eyes like a hawk and a beard trimmed with mathematical precision. He shows you how the wax impression doesn't align perfectly with the expected dye. It's subtle, barely noticeable, but to trained eyes. It's the difference between routine paperwork and potential treason. Historians still argue whether seal tampering was common, or mostly a fear magnified by bureaucratic caution. Some evidence suggests the system worked surprisingly well. Others hint that forged seals occasionally slipped through, especially in times of crisis. You glance at the imperfect impression again and decide you prefer a world where wax tells the truth. Your task today is to learn proper sealing protocol. First, the document must be folded in a prescribed manner. No creative origami allowed. Then, a cord is threaded through small slits in the parchment. The knot must sit flush. Wax is dripped over the knot, forming a neat pool. Finally, the seal matrix is pressed firmly into the warm wax, held steady for a count of 3 heartbeats, then lifted straight up, tilted, and the impression blurs. Press too lightly, and the symbol fades. It's oddly meditative. You almost forget that each seal represents the authority of the emperor. At one point, you press too hard, and a little extra wax squishes out around the edges, like a crimson halo. The supervisor clears his throat. You adjust your technique. There's no room for artistic interpretation here. A quirky tidbit circulates among the clerks. Some officials supposedly slept with their personal seal rings under their pillows, fearing theft. Imagine rolling over in the night, only to jab yourself with your own authority. It's both dedicated and mildly tragic. As the day progresses, messengers arrive with bundles of documents from across the empire. Each bundle carries seals from provincial governors, military commanders, or financial officers. You examine them one by one. Some bear intricate designs, others are simpler but still precise. The variety is fascinating tiny works of art pressed into metal and wax. One particularly ornate lead seal catches your eye. It features a detailed image of a saint alongside the official's name. This blend of religious imagery and administrative function is unmistakably Byzantine. In this empire, divine protection and fiscal responsibility coexist comfortably on the same piece of lead. You imagine explaining that to a modern accountant. Yes, the budget report is sealed with St. George, very standard. You're shown how to archive broken seals. Even fragments are kept, stored in small labeled boxes. They serve as evidence that a document was opened properly and by the correct authority. Nothing is discarded casually. The empire hoards proof the way a dragon hoards treasure, except the treasure is slightly dusty and tied with string. Later, you witness a more dramatic moment. A courier from a distant Thema military district arrives with a dispatch marked urgent. The wax is intact, but the impression looks off. The supervisor compares it against a reference tablet containing impressions of known official seals. He frowns. The room grows quiet. After tense minutes of scrutiny, he concludes that the seal matrix must have been recut recently legitimately, perhaps, but not yet registered in the capital. A note is made. A message will be sent back requesting clarification. No accusations yet, just careful procedure. It's bureaucratic suspense at its finest. As the charcoal braziers glow softly and the room fills with a steady drip of wax, you begin to appreciate the logic behind all this ritual. Seals create a chain of accountability. They transform fragile parchment into enforceable command. They protect against forgery, or at least make it inconvenient. And there's something soothing about the repetition. Melt, drip, press, lift, inspect, record. Each step deliberate, each impression final. Outside these walls, armies clash and merchants haggle. But here, authority solidifies in cooling wax. By the end of the afternoon, your fingertips are slightly sticky, your wrist pleasantly sore. You've sealed a dozen documents without major catastrophe. The supervisor gives a small nod high praise in a room where enthusiasm is rationed carefully. You set down the seal matrix and watch the last impression harden, its surface turning from glossy red to matte certainty. In this empire, trust is never assumed. It's pressed firmly into wax, cataloged and filed away for safekeeping. And you, steady-handed and mildly wax-splattered, are becoming fluent in the language of cautious power. Thanks for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for our next adventure in the Byzantine bureaucracy. The next bundle that lands on your desk smells faintly of dust and river reeds, as if it has traveled a very long way to complain about something extremely specific. The cord is knotted in a provincial style you're beginning to recognize, and the attached lead seal bears the name of an official stationed in Egypt. You smooth the parchment, lean closer, and begin tracing the careful script that details grain shipments, tax assessments, and irrigation repairs along the Nile. Egypt, even under Byzantine rule, remains the empire's breadbasket. Mainstream historians consistently emphasize that the steady flow of Egyptian grain into the capital is essential for feeding the vast population of Constantinople. Without it, urban unrest could ignite faster than a charcoal brazier under a wax dish. You imagine 500,000 citizens eyeing their empty bread baskets and suddenly becoming very interested in politics. Your job today is to log and reconcile provincial tax rolls. The empire draws revenue from land taxes, trade duties, and various fees that seem designed to ensure no olive goes unaccounted for. The documents from Egypt detail harvest yields measured with impressive precision, bushels listed, transport schedules outlined, expected arrival dates noted. It's less glamorous than a triumphal parade, but arguably more important. Bread beats banners every time. You flip to a section outlining arrears villages that have failed to deliver the expected amount of grain or coin. Marginal notes in a different hand question whether flooding reduced yields or whether local officials are creatively misplacing revenue. Historians still argue whether Byzantine taxation was crushingly heavy or simply rigorous by pre-modern standards. Some sources describe hardship and resentment. Others suggest the system was comparatively stable and predictable. As you scan the neat columns of numbers, you can't quite tell whether you're looking at fairness or quiet desperation. Probably a bit of both. A more unexpected report arrives from Anatolia, detailing livestock counts alongside grain tallies. Apparently, sheep matter too. The empire wants to know how many, where, and in whose care. You can't help imagining a very serious bureaucrat somewhere arguing passionately about goat discrepancies. The ledger clearly states 12. He insists, while a farmer shrugs and blames a wolf. There's something oddly intimate about these tax rolls. They reduce entire communities to lines of ink, fields measured, households counted, debts tallied. Yet behind each entry lies a real place, a hillside vineyard, a dusty marketplace, a riverbank alive with reeds. You picture farmers squinting into the sun as officials assess their crops, knowing that a portion of their labor will travel hundreds of miles to support a distant capital. A quirky tidbit catches your eye in a margin note, a small sketch of a crocodile next to a line about Nile transport. It might simply mark shipments from a specific district, but you prefer to imagine a board clerk with a sense of humor. Crocodiles as administrative shorthand, you make a mental note not to doodle anything similarly ambitious on official documents. As the morning wears on, you begin cross-referencing numbers. Totals from one scroll must match summaries in another. Discrepancies are circled in faint red ink. The process is meticulous. It's also oddly calming. Add, subtract, confirm, repeat. You almost forget that any miscalculation could ripple outward, affecting grain prices in the capital or funding for soldiers on the frontier. You're briefly summoned to a larger table where senior officials discuss revenue projections. They speak in measured tones about anticipated shortfalls and surplus storage. There's mention of adjusting levies in certain regions if harvests prove abundant. It's strategic, almost modern in its fiscal planning. The empire doesn't just collect taxes, it forecasts them. One official reference is past records from decades earlier to compare yield patterns. That's when you appreciate the true power of those dusty archives. With enough documentation, the state can identify trends, flood cycles, trade fluctuations, population shifts. The bureaucracy becomes a memory machine, storing patterns across generations. Of course, not every province is as cooperative as Egypt. A dispatch from a Balkan region hints at unrest, noting delayed payments and local difficulties. The phrase is suspiciously vague. You log it carefully. Sometimes paperwork is the first tremor before something more dramatic shakes the ground. You pause to flex your hand and glance out a narrow window. The Bosporus glitters beyond the palace walls, ships moving steadily across its surface. Somewhere out there, grain vessels approach, their holds full of wheat, destined for bakeries and markets. The numbers on your parchment will soon become loaves of bread. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine tax system was more efficient than that of its contemporaries, but few dispute that it was thorough. And here you are, contributing to that thoroughness, one entry at a time. By late afternoon, your desk is neatly stacked with reconciled reports, each annotated and sealed for forwarding to higher offices. You feel a quiet satisfaction. You didn't grow the grain, you didn't sail the ships, but you ensured the records align, that the empire's expectations match reality, at least on paper. And in Byzantium, paper war, rather Parchmentese reality's official twin, you tie the final scroll with steady hands, imagining distant fields shimmering under Egyptian sun, Anatolian shepherds counting sheep, Balkan villagers muttering about levies. Their lives condense into ink beneath your pen, traveling inward toward the capital's hungry heart. Tomorrow, more rolls will arrive, more numbers to tame. For now, you lean back slightly, listening to the gentle chorus of scratching pens around you, aware that in this empire, even the quiet act of counting grain can shape history. Ever stepped into a government office and felt completely lost? Imagine doing that 1,000 years ago, in the heart of the Byzantine Empire. The further you wander into its administrative maze, the more you hear one title whispered with both respect and a little bit of fear. Legathiots. It sounds elegant, but these are the empire's financial masterminds, the ministers who juggle coin, grain, salaries, and the occasional imperial budget crisis. Today, you've been summoned. Not aggressively, but with a tone that says, being late isn't really an option. You arrive at the office of the Legathiots Tegeneku, the chief of the General Treasury. Forget what you see in movies, there are no golden thrones here, just a massive desk covered in perfectly stacked codices and wax tablets. This guy could win an Olympic medal in organization. Historians tell us that by the Middle Byzantine period, the administration was highly specialized. There was a Legathiots for general taxes, another for military finances, one for the postal routes, and even one for the emperor's personal estates. This system grew over centuries, getting more and more complex. It's still a debate whether this made the government more efficient or just created more people who could lose your paperwork. You're handed a ledger. It's a summary of the provincial reports you worked on yesterday. All those messy details are now condensed into neat columns of revenue and expenses. Grain is converted into its monetary value. Salaries are projected for troops stationed far away on the Anatolian frontier. Repair costs are estimated for fortifications along the eastern border. Suddenly, the abstract idea of an empire feels very, very real. The Legathiots himself is a middle-aged man with sharp, steady eyes and ink stains permanently etched into his fingers. He points to a section and asks you to read it aloud. As your voice echoes in the quiet chamber, he listens intently, nodding. He stops you to ask about a discrepancy in a coastal province. You remember a note about recent flood damage and answer carefully. For a brief moment, you feel like a crucial part of this immense, complex machine, and it is a machine. The empire's finances aren't just numbers on a page. They pay the soldiers who defend the borders, the shipbuilders who construct the fleet, the diplomats on sensitive missions, and they fund the lavish ceremonies that remind everyone of the emperor's power. Without this meticulous accounting, the entire structure would start to wobble. This fiscal discipline is a huge reason why the Byzantine Empire lasted for over 1,000 years. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was absolutely essential. On a side table, you spot a small, locked chest. You know what's inside: gold solidus coins, each one stamped with the emperor's face. This coin, first introduced by Constantine the Great, was the gold standard of the medieval world. From Europe to the Near East, merchants trusted the solidus. You fight the urge to go take a closer look. This is definitely not a gift shop. A junior clerk quietly tells you a funny story. Apparently, in earlier centuries, the treasury even tracked the number of silk garments given to court officials. Can you imagine? Filing a formal complaint because your ceremonial robe was delayed? Somewhere in history, a logotheus is letting out a very long sigh. Of course, with all this power comes temptation. You overhear hushed conversations about bribes a gift to lower a tax bill or speed up a payment. Was corruption rampant, or was it kept under control? Historians still argue about it. We have records of court cases showing both harsh punishments for corruption and evidence that it was a persistent problem. The paper trail could expose you, but only if someone was brave enough to follow it. There's another story going around about an overly ambitious official who tried to impress the treasury by inflating the projected revenue numbers. He got a nasty surprise when the actual tax collections fell short. His optimism was not appreciated. The empire, it seems, prefers realism over motivational speeches. Your new task is to help calculate the military payroll. The empire was divided into military districts called themes, and these required constant, reliable funding. Soldiers were often granted land in exchange for service, and their obligations had to be tracked. The numbers march across the page like tiny, disciplined soldiers. Add stipends, subtract the cost of equipment, adjust for casualties reported in the last dispatch from the front. It's sobering to see the brutal reality of war translated into simple arithmetic. Outside the window, the sun shines on the rooftops of Constantinople, but inside, the only sound is the steady scratching of pens on parchment. You realize that while emperors and generals get all the credit for victories, it's the people in these quiet rooms who make sure the armies are paid and the fleets are supplied. The logothetes pauses, tapping a column of figures. Accuracy, he says, almost to himself, accuracy preserves the empire. You nod, feeling the profound weight of that simple statement. There's a calm intensity in this room. No shouting, no drama. Just careful review, constant cross-checking, and deliberate decisions. A surplus from one province might cover a deficit in another. A small, temporary tax adjustment could fund urgent repairs to a crumbling fortress wall. Everything is connected. As the afternoon wears on, you help draft a financial summary for the Emperor's Council. The language is precise and to the point. The numbers speak for themselves. But even so, the document begins with a traditional prayer for divine favor. In Byzantium, even balance sheets had to acknowledge a higher power. By the time you finish stacking the sealed ledgers for review, your mind is buzzing with totals and projections. You VA just had a glimpse into the Empire's bloodstream, the constant circulation of resources that keeps the entire body alive, from the heart of the capital to the most distant provinces. Walking back through the palace corridors, you think about how much trust is placed in these calculations. A little too much optimism, and the treasury could run dry. A little too much caution, and provinces could suffer under heavy taxes. It's a delicate dance, performed every single day with ink and quiet concentration. And you, just a short while ago, you were intimidated by all the color-coded scrolls and complex ledgers. Now, you find yourself confidently navigating columns of imperial revenue. The administrative labyrinth still feels complex, maybe still a little terrifying, but it's no longer a complete mystery. You're starting to understand how an empire really works. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the Byzantine bureaucracy, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more dives into the fascinating details of history. See you next time. By now, your respect for parchment has deepened into something almost reverential. You no longer see it as just a surface for ink, but as a living expense animal, hide stretched, scraped, and polished into bureaucratic destiny. Today, you resent to the supply storerooms to understand exactly why every sheet you casually request has someone sighing somewhere in the background. The storeroom smells of leather, lime, and faint dampness. Bundles of prepared parchment are stacked carefully on wooden racks. Each sheet creamy and slightly translucent when held to the light. A quartermaster with perpetually furrowed brows oversees distribution like a dragon guarding a hoardexcept instead of gold. He hoards goats. Mainstream historians agree that parchment, made from animal skins, usually sheep, goats, or cabaswas, the primary writing material in the Byzantine Empire for centuries. Producing it required time, labor, and livestock. Skins were soaked in lime to loosen hair, scraped clean, stretched on frames, and dried under tension. The result was durable. Yes, but not cheap. Every decree you copy carries the ghost of a goat. You're handed a slightly flawed sheet, one with a faint scar running diagonally across it. Practice material, the quartermaster mutters. Premium parchment is reserved for imperial edicts, legal codes, and important correspondence. Lesser sheets suffice for drafts or internal memos. Even in bureaucracy, there's a hierarchy of paper. You run your fingers across the surface. It's smoother than you expected, though subtle ripples reveal its organic origin. It's oddly grounding to remember that the Empire's grand pronouncements rest on something so tangible and earthy. A fellow clerk leans over and whispers about shortages. In times of war or plague, livestock numbers drop and parchment supplies tighten. Historians still argue whether occasional material shortages meaningfully slowed administrative output or whether the system adapted smoothly. Some suggest wax tablets and reused palimpsests filled the gap. Others suspect delays and quiet frustration. Ah, yes, palimpsests. You re-shown a fascinating example, a parchment sheet where earlier writing has been carefully scraped away and overwritten. Under certain light, faint traces of the original text remain visible beneath the new script, like a ghostly whisper from the past. It's practical recycling, Byzantine style. A thrifty empire never wastes good skin. There's even a quirky rumor circulating among the staff that some older religious texts were occasionally repurposed for mundane administrative use when supplies ran low. Imagine filing a tax record on top of a faded hymn. Whether fully accurate or embellished, the idea captures the pragmatic streak of the bureaucracy. But change is quietly on the horizon. You overhear two senior clerks discussing actual paper made from pulped fibers rather than animal hides. The material has traveled westward from China through the Islamic world. By the 10th century, paper begins appearing more frequently in Byzantine administration, though parchment remains dominant for high-status documents. Mainstream scholarship notes that Islamic regions adopted paper earlier and more extensively, influencing neighboring states, including Byzantium. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine state was slow to adopt paper out of conservatism or simply due to supply networks and quality concerns. Parchment is durable, prestigious, proven. Paper is cheaper and lighter, but does it endure? You hold a scrap of imported paper between your fingers. It feels softer, almost fragile, like something that might surrender to humidity. A senior scribe jokes that paper is for drafts and poetry, parchment for empire building. You suspect that in a few centuries, someone will look back and chuckle at that confidence. Your assignment this afternoon involves preparing parchment for a series of duplicate decrees. You inspect each sheet carefully for flaws holes, uneven thickness, lingering hair follicles. Yes, that happens. Ink behaves differently depending on the surface. Too rough and the letters bleed, too smooth and the pen slips. You mix fresh ink while you wait, grinding soot with gum arabic and water. The rhythmic motion is soothing. Around you, the storeroom hums quietly as assistants count, stack, and record outgoing sheets. Every piece is logged, quantity distributed, department receiving it. Nothing escapes the ledger. It's remarkable. Really an empire not only obsessed with documenting the world, but equally meticulous about documenting the materials used to document the world. Bureaucracy squared. As late afternoon light filters through the high windows, illuminating suspended dust particles like tiny drifting constellations, you help carry a bundle of parchment back to the main offices. It's heavier than it looks. Authority has weight. You pause briefly in the corridor, balancing the stack against your hip. Somewhere in these sheets, future edicts will be written. Military orders, tax reforms, diplomatic overtures, perhaps even peace treaties, all dependent on stretched skin and steady hands. There's something humbling about that. The grand arc of history resting on livestock management and supply chains. By the time you return to your desk, you treat each sheet with a little more care. You align it precisely. You measure margins carefully to avoid waste. A blot of ink feels more consequential now. The empire may run on paperwork, but paperwork runs on parchment or increasingly tentative sheets of imported paper. And you, ink-stained and slightly more appreciative of goats than you ever expected, are part of that delicate material equation. You smooth the first page, dip your pen, and begin again aware that even the surface beneath your words has a story. With your newfound respect for goats and imported fibers, you return to your desk, where a daunting sight awaits, a single imperial edict that must become many. not to copies, not 3, a dozen, at minimum each destined for a different office, archive, or provincial governor who will nod solemnly while pretending to read every word. The decree concerns adjustments to harbor duties in a cluster of Aegean ports. Nothing dramatic, no. Declarations of war, no excommunications, just percentages and procedures. And yet, because it bears imperial authority, it must be replicated flawlessly. Mainstream historians note that Byzantine governance depended heavily on duplication. Documents were copied for central archives, provincial files, and relevant departments. Creating a web of textual reinforcement, redundancy wasn't inefficiency. It was survival strategy. You aligned the original parchment before you, weighted gently at the corners to prevent curling. The script is formal Greek, elegant but precise. Your task is to reproduce it line by line, preserving not only the content but the tone. No improvisation, no stylistic flair. This is not your creative writing workshop. The first copy goes smoothly. You've settled into a rhythm. Dip, write, pause, breathe. The scratch of your reed pen joins the steady chorus in the chamber. Across from you, another scribe works on the same decree, creating a parallel version. It's strangely comforting to know that if you accidentally transform harbor beauty into harbor beauty, someone else might catch it. Historians still argue whether most provincial officials actually read every decree in full or relied on summaries prepared by local staff. Considering the volume of paperwork streaming outward from the capital, it's tempting to imagine some governor skimming the first paragraph and filing the rest under important, probably, but officially, every word matters. By the third copy, your hand begins to protest. You flex your fingers discreetly. The letters must remain uniform, no, drifting into sloppiness, just because your wrist feels like it's staging a minor rebellion. In Byzantium, consistency is a virtue. If one copy differs from another, confusion and possibly exploitation can follow. A senior clerk passes behind you, inspecting margins. Leave space for annotations, he murmurs. Of course, provincial officials may append notes, clarifications, or records of implementation. The document isn't static. It's part of an ongoing administrative conversation. There's a quirky tidbit circulating among scribes. Some copies of imperial edicts were occasionally embellished with subtle flourishes when destined for particularly prestigious recipients. Nothing overt, just slightly more ornate lettering, perhaps a decorative initial. It's bureaucratic flattery, the medieval equivalent of using equality stationery. As you progress to copy number 6, you reflect on the emperor's role in all this. The decree likely originated from discussions among advisors shaped by financial projections from the legates, reviewed by senior secretaries, and finally approved in principle by the emperor himself. But what travels outward is this ink on parchment, replicated by hands like yours. Mainstream scholarship emphasizes that the durability of Byzantine law owed much to such meticulous copying practices. Without reliable duplication, consistency across provinces would falter. In a realm stretching across diverse cultures and landscapes, shared text becomes shared structure. You reach the section outlining penalties for noncompliance. The phrasing tightens slightly, reminding readers that imperial patience has limits. You copy it carefully, resisting the urge to add an extra flourish under penalties. The empire prefers understated authority. By late afternoon, the stack of completed copies rises steadily. Each one is checked against the original for errors. Minor corrections are scraped gently with a knife and rewritten. Too many mistakes, and the sheet is relegated to draft status. There's no dramatic shredding, just quiet demotion. Historians still debate how often significant copying errors slipped through and altered administrative outcomes. In large textual traditions, scribal mistakes are inevitable. A misplaced numeral on a tax rate could have real consequences. You double-check every figure, suddenly very aware of the power of a single stroke. A fellow scribe jokes softly that if repetition builds character, the Byzantine bureaucracy must be the most virtuous institution in history. You suppress a laugh, 3 light jokes per 1,000 words. You're doing your part. As dusk approaches, oil lamps are lit, casting warm pools of light over your workspace. The flickering glow makes the ink shimmer slightly before it dries. You complete the final copy, stretching your stiff fingers. The original decree is returned to its protective wrapping. Your duplicates are arranged in neat piles, ready for sealing and dispatch. Soon they will travel by horse, ship, and foot across mountains and seas, carrying identical instructions to distant harbors. You sit back and survey your work. 12 nearly identical parchments, each bearing the same measured language, the same margins, the same authority. It's repetitive, yes, but it's also connective. These copies will bind disparate ports into a unified fiscal policy. Outside, the Bosporus darkens into twilight. Inside, the last strokes of the day dry on parchment. You clean your pen carefully, mindful of tomorrow's inevitable stack. In this empire, decisions echo not through shouted proclamations alone, but through careful duplication. Line by line, copy by copy, you help transform singular intent into distributed order. And while your wrist may grumble, your script grows steadier lure, letters marching across the page with quiet, unwavering discipline. The next stack that arrives on your desk doesn't smell like harbor salt or Nile reeds. It carries the faint scent of horse sweat and campfire smoke. The cord is tied with practical efficiency, and the seal bears the insignia of a Stratogoza military governor from one of the Empire's themes. You straighten slightly. Military paperwork has a different weight to it, even before you read a single word. The theme system, established in the centuries after the empire lost vast territories to Arab conquests, reorganized much of the remaining land into military districts. Mainstream historians agree that this restructuring, which accelerated in the 7th and 8th centuries, allowed the Byzantine state to mobilize regional forces more effectively. Soldiers were often granted land in exchange for service, binding local defense directly to local administration. It was practical, resilient, and, of course, heavily documented. You untie the cord and unfold the parchment. The report lists troop numbers, equipment inventories, and notes on fortification repairs along a frontier in Anatolia. It's meticulous. Even the condition of armor is mentioned, serviceable, in need of repair, or the ominous lost under unclear circumstances. Historians still argue whether the theme soldiers were primarily farmer soldiers with small plots of land, or whether the system evolved into something more complex and stratified over time. As you scan the neat columns, you sense layers of reality beneath the numbers. Each entry represents a person who farms by day and drills by afternoon. Your task is to log the report and cross-reference it with previous submissions. You pull an older scroll from the archive chest and compare troop counts. A slight decline. You note it carefully. Casualties, desertions, illness. The new report mentions recent skirmishes, but offers no dramatic detail. Bureaucracy has a way of compressing chaos into calm phrasing. A second document outlines supply levels, grain reserves for garrisons, arrow stockpiles, funds allocated for maintaining walls. The empire doesn't just send soldiers to the frontier and hope for the best. It measures inventories and audits them. Somewhere, Alagatheats is waiting to reconcile these numbers with treasury allocations. There's something grounding about this. Wars may rage beyond the mountains, but here in the palace, conflict is reduced to ink and arithmetic. You imagine a soldier tightening his sandal strap while hundreds of miles away, you calculate the stipend that supports him. It's a quiet connection. A quirky marginal note catches your eye. Beside the tally of mules, someone has added a tiny sketch of one with exaggerated ears. You wonder if military scribes, like their palace counterparts, resort to small artistic rebellions to survive the monotony. Even in serious reports, humanity peeks through. Midway through the stack, you encounter a more urgent dispatch. The wax seal is double layered in, extra precaution. The text details suspicious movements near the border and requests additional funds for scouting operations. The phrasing is careful, not alarmist, but the undertone is clear. Attention required. You pass this document to a senior official for expedited review. Procedure dictates that urgent military communications move swiftly through the system. Still, they are logged, copied, and archived like everything else. No matter how pressing the matter, it must leave a paper trail. Mainstream scholarship emphasizes that the Byzantine military's endurance owed much to this administrative backbone. Supply lines, payroll, fortification maintenance all depended on reliable documentation. Without it, even the bravest soldiers would struggle. You pause for a moment and imagine the frontier described in the reports. Rocky hills, watchtowers silhouetted against a pale sky, the distant glint of armor, It feels far removed from your desk and its orderly stacks, yet your work shapes theirs. If a stipend is delayed because of a clerical error, morale dips. If supplies are miscounted, defenses weaken. Historians still debate how centralized control truly was over the themes. Did Strategoi enjoy significant autonomy, or were they tightly bound by palace oversight? As you file the latest report, you sense a delicate balance. The capital relies on accurate local reporting. The provinces rely on fair and timely support. The afternoon light slants across your desk as you finish annotating the final document. You seal a summary copy destined for the Treasury, ensuring military expenditures align with fiscal planning. War translated into budget lines, strategy distilled into signatures. Across the chamber, another clerk yawns discreetly, then resumes copying a supply inventory. It's almost comical the contrast between distant skirmishes and this quiet room where the loudest sound is a scratching pen. You tie the last scroll neatly and place it in the outgoing basket. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, riders will carry updated instructions back to the frontier. Reinforcements approved, funds allocated, orders clarified. And here you remain, steady and ink-stained, the quiet hinge between sword and sovereign. The empire's survival may depend on courage at its borders, but it also depends on careful accounting at its center. You stretch your fingers, feeling the familiar ache settle in, and prepare for the next bundle, because even on the edge of war, someone must keep the numbers straight. The following morning begins not with grand announcements or clattering bells, but with the soft, repetitive sound of counting. You are assigned to assist with the Empire's latest Sensasa monumental effort to measure not just territory, but people, property, and potential revenue. The parchment before you stretches like a narrow river, filled with rows of households, occupations, and curious marginal notes. Census taking in the Byzantine Empire was no casual undertaking. Mainstream historians agree that these surveys, known as apocrypha, aimed to catalog taxable households, male citizens eligible for military service, and even livestock in some regions. The data fueled everything from tax collection to troop allocation. In theory, the empire sought a perfect snapshot of its subjects. In practice, you suspect it resembled a complex game of guesswork and human error. Your first task is to reconcile entries received from a provincial office in Macedonia. Village names, household heads, numbers of residents, and occasionally notes on property or exemptions are neatly listed. You check the figures against previous year's submissions. A slight discrepancy emerges. One household suddenly claims to more adult males than last year. Was this an honest update? A clerical error? A local attempt to curry favor or evade tax? Historians still debate whether census data was consistently accurate or often manipulated for local advantage. You add a careful annotation, capturing both numbers and doubt. Working with the census is tedious, yet strangely absorbing. Each household becomes a story condensed into columns of ink. The miller with 3 sons, the widow who tends her olive grove, the fisherman whose nets are noted only for tax purposes. You pause occasionally, imagining these lives sun-drenched, labor-filled, sometimes anxious about imperial demands. Bureaucracy, in its quiet way, observes human patterns more keenly than most generals. A quirky note in the margin catches your attention. Beside one entry, an official has drawn a tiny stick figure shepherd with an oversized crook. Perhaps a joke, perhaps a shorthand reminder of local terrain. Either way, it lightens the monotony of endless rows of names. As the morning progresses, you cross-reference settlements with prior military records. The theme system requires an understanding of population to properly deploy troops. Every male counted might represent a potential soldier, every household a source of taxes. You realize, with a slight shiver, that the empire thrives on the careful tallying of human life. Not in a macabre sense, but in the precise procedural one. Data as infrastructure. Historians still argue how thorough these censuses truly were, especially in distant provinces. Some suggest that officials exaggerated numbers to reflect efficiency or loyalty. Others contend that even partial compliance was sufficient to maintain central control. Either way, your pen moves steadily, capturing a snapshot of an entire society. A clerk beside you explains that the census serves multiple functions. Beyond taxation and military planning, it informs resource allocation, grain shipments, road maintenance, and even postal services. Accurate counts mean fewer errors in logistics, which in turn keeps provincial resentment low and imperial authority intact. The empire survives not just by force, but by meticulous record-keeping. As you tally figures, you notice occasional footnotes, exemptions for monks, disputes over property boundaries, or reports of plague outbreaks. Even disease finds its way into the bureaucratic record. You imagine a scribe noting deaths with the same calm precision as they would a tax payment. Human tragedy reduced to ink. By midday, your wrist begins to ache from continuous writing. You stretch, glance at the pale sunlight streaming through the high windows, and watch dust motes drift lazily over the neatly stacked census sheets. Each sheet represents a village, a neighborhood, a patch of human life now accounted for in the sprawling machinery of empire. A particularly large entry demands multiple pages, a bustling port town with merchants, artisans, and sailors. You carefully number the sheets and ensure that they correspond to the ledger, preventing misalignment. Accuracy is everything. Errors in one page can cascade into misallocated resources, mispaid soldiers, or frustrated governors. Historians still debate whether the empire ever achieved a fully accurate demographic picture. Some argue that Byzantine officials knew their counts were incomplete, but relied on trends and estimations. Others suggest the census itself helped enforce control, giving central authorities a psychological sense of dominion, even if numbers wavered. By late afternoon, the stack of reconciled census documents is complete. Every household noted, every discrepancy annotated. Your hand throbs pleasantly, a reminder of hours spent carefully recording lives reduced to rows of ink. Outside, Constantinople hums with activity, the distant clatter of carts, the calls of merchants, the glint of sunlight on the Bosporus inside. The empire rests its knowledge on parchment and patience. You collect the completed bundles for forwarding to higher offices, feeling a subtle pride. While the soldiers march, the governors negotiate, and merchants trade. You've participated in an empire-wide accounting of life itself. Each number, carefully logged, sustains structure, order, and surprisingly justice. And as you straighten the final sheets, you realize the quiet truth. In Byzantium, every individual counted, every household noted, and every number preserved matters. You are, for now, a witness, a participant, and a guardian of order. By the following morning, the census has been filed, and you re-given a new sort of task, evaluating correspondence from the empire's envoys abroad. The pile before you smells faintly of salt, ink, and exotic spices, a blend that instantly transports your imagination to distant lands. The letters are written on parchment, sealed carefully, and tied with cords in a rainbow of colors. Blue for Western missions, green for the eastern frontier, red for the emperor himself. Each bundle feels like a miniature embassy in your hands. Byzantine diplomacy was famously meticulous. Mainstream historians note that envoys often traveled for months, if not years, carrying messages, treaties, and gifts between courts. Every letter was copied, sealed, and filed upon arrival in the capital. And clerks like you were tasked with recording their content precisely. Historians still argue whether the elaborate ritual surrounding these communications was primarily practical, ceremonial, or a bit of both. Either way, every stroke of ink mattered. You untie the first letter. It originates from a small court in the Caucasus. The letter opens with grandiose greetings, blessings of health and divine favor, and a long preamble about the sender's loyalty. You suppress a sigh. Byzantine correspondence loves preambles. Then it moves into the essential content: requests for military aid, trade permissions, and occasionally delicate political observations. The language is formal, but subtle nuances could signal urgency, resentment, or flattery. Your job is to transcribe the letter faithfully into the imperial archive, noting any discrepancies from prior communications. A misread adjective could mislead the emperor, causing a misstep in foreign policy. You imagine a tiny misinterpretation leading to an awkward dinner with someone's cousin who happens to be a king. That would be unfortunate. A quirky marginal note in the letter catches your attention. A tiny doodle of a camel next to a sentence about desert trade. Someone likely the envoy or a clerk before you added a little humor. Even in serious diplomatic correspondence, human levity finds a way. You smile and make a mental note that humor survives across centuries, even in the most formal of empires. You proceed to a bundle of dispatches from the Venetian merchants. These letters are more practical than ceremonial, detailing trade agreements, shipping routes, and occasionally complaints about delayed shipments. You cross-reference the cargo lists with tax records. A missing olive barrel here, a delayed silk shipment there. The empire must track every detail. Failure to reconcile even minor discrepancies can ripple into lost revenue or political embarrassment. Historians still debate whether the Byzantine administration's focus on paperwork truly enhanced diplomatic efficiency or primarily served to create an impression of omniscient control. In other words, did rulers act on information, or did they act because it was recorded? You note the subtle differences in phrasing between letters from different regions. Pondering this question as your pen scratches over parchment, later you encounter a more urgent set of communications, warnings about potential incursions along the Danube frontier. The language is careful, deliberately measured, but the meaning is unmistakable. Troop movements may be required. Supplies must be ready. Your transcription must be precise. A single misreading could delay reinforcements. You feel a flicker of tension as the weight of the message settles. A fellow clerk whispers that envoys occasionally included secret codes or subtle hints in their letters and early form of diplomatic steganography. Symbols disguised as decorative flourishes, repeated phrases with hidden meanings. You inspect a few margins, half expecting to uncover a secret message in the looping pen strokes. No luck today, but the possibility is exciting. By mid-afternoon, you've processed dozens of letters, transcribed their content into the archive, and prepared summaries for the imperial secretaries. Each dispatch is logged meticulously its journey through the bureaucracy, documented for posterity. The rhythm of your pen and the rustle of parchment become almost hypnotic, like a soft Byzantine lullaby of governance. Outside, the city hums with life, the clanging of blacksmiths, the calls of vendors, and the creak of harbor cranes. Inside, you participate in a quieter but equally crucial function, transforming distant voices into recorded knowledge, enabling the emperor and his council to act with informed authority. A final envelope from the Abbasid court sits at the bottom of the stack. The seal is intact, and the language, while courteous, is taught with formality. You take a deep breath, knowing that this correspondence, once transcribed and filed, could influence strategic decisions hundreds of miles away. One stroke of your pen might help prevent misunderstandings or even avert conflict. As the oil lamps are lit and the room darkens, you lean back, fingers ink-stained but steady, and reflect on the strange intimacy of these documents. Every letter, every marginal doodle, every carefully recorded detail is a tiny thread in the vast tapestry of empire. By the end of the day, you have not just copied letters, you have helped weave the empire itself. Today brings a new rhythm, auditing. You're led into a spacious room lined with shelves of accounts, tall bundles stacked neatly, and low tables covered with columns of numbers. The scent of ink and wax mingles with something faintly metallic, the subtle aroma of coins stored in tiny wooden boxes. This is the heart of Byzantine fiscal oversight, where nothing escapes scrutiny and every solidus counts. Auditing, mainstream historians note, was a cornerstone of imperial control. Byzantine administrators compared ledgers from provincial offices, military units, and palace departments to detect discrepancies or fraud. Historians still argue whether audits were rigorous enough to prevent widespread corruption, or whether they primarily functioned to create the impression of omnipresent oversight. You're about to test that theory. Your first task is a routine comparison of grain deliveries recorded by the Bureaucrats and those reported by the relevant provincial governors. You lay out the ledgers side by side, aligning columns of numbers, bushels, weights, shipment dates. Your pen hovers, ready to mark any mismatch. A small discrepancy appears 10 bushels of wheat reported as delivered in one ledger but absent in another. You note it carefully. Was this a clerical oversight, a transportation mishap, or something more nefarious? The auditors leave that determination to higher authorities. Your duty is to record the anomaly. Next, you cross-reference coin payments against supply receipts, soldiers, wages, fees for fortification, maintenance, and payments to mercenary ship captains all pass under your gaze. Every figure must match. Mistakes aren't just embarrassing, they could destabilize logistics, anger generals, or provoke complaints from local administrators. Accuracy feels weighty, almost tactile, as you mark balanced totals with a neat stroke. You notice a quirky marginal note beside a ledger. a small doodle of a soldier balancing a coin on his helmet. You can't help but smile. Even in the midst of meticulous accounting, human humor persists. Someone long ago decided to lighten the monotony with a tiny sketch, and centuries later, it still makes you pause. Then comes a letter of correction from a provincial governor. He claims that a prior shipment of grain was miscounted due to flooding. You trace the earlier ledger entries, verify the dates, and annotate the correction carefully. The flow of information feels almost a live report's corrections and confirmations circulating in an endless loop of accountability. Historians still debate how much central oversight actually reached the far-flung provinces. Some argue that local officials had significant autonomy, manipulating records when convenient. Others suggest that audits, combined with the threat of punitive measures, maintained effective compliance. Your pen hovers over the numbers, appreciating the delicate balance. A particularly large stack of accounts arrives from a coastal theme, including shipping logs and harbor tolls. You tally the entries against prior records. Occasionally, scribes added small symbols to indicate special circumstances, storms, pirate activity, or merchant disputes. You make note of these anomalies, aware that even a minor note can influence a future decision in the capital. By late afternoon, you're deeply immersed in reconciling complex financial data. Columns of numbers blur together, yet each line carries the pulse of the empire, its taxes, wages, supplies, and obligations. Without this labor, soldiers might go unpaid, walls fall unrepaired, and governors quarrel over resources. You marvel at how ink and meticulous attention uphold vast administrative structures. A senior auditor leans over your shoulder, murmuring, "Remember, an empire is only as strong as its ledgers." You nod. The statement feels profound, almost poetic, despite its pragmatic context. Somewhere, an emperor may never read these exact entries, but their accuracy sustains his rule. Finally, you complete a summary report of today's audits. Every discrepancy, correction, and confirmed entry is noted. The bundle is tied neatly with cords, ready to move onward for review and filing. The room feels quieter now, the scribes resting, pens lifted, and the faint aroma of parchment and coins lingering in the air. You lean back, hands sore, eyes tired, and reflect on the peculiar satisfaction of accounting on an imperial scale. The empire may be known for its grand architecture, majestic ceremonies, and theological debates, but here, in the quiet hum of ledger reconciliation, its true resilience is made visible. The audit is finally over. They lead you down a narrower hallway into a chamber that smells faintly of wax and old paper. The room is filled with an odd collection of items, small wooden chests, stacks of twisted cord, and more beeswax than you've ever seen in one place. This, you're told, is the archive of imperial correspondence. It holds letters, petitions, official decrees, and field reports, all organized with painstaking precision for future reference. Your job sounds simple enough. Catalog, cross-reference, and file everything away. But as you look around at the mountains of parchment, it feels less like organizing and more like trying to tame a miniature jungle made of paper. The Byzantine Empire was famous for its extensive record-keeping. It's something mainstream historians always emphasize, how the empire kept copies of almost all correspondence and legal documents. This wasn't just about hoarding paper. It was about maintaining institutional memory. It ensured that the government could function smoothly, even as officials came and went. Historians still argue about who had access to these archives. Was it open to all officials, or was it a closely guarded resource for palace insiders? Whatever the case, these collections were the backbone of the empire, ensuring continuity across generations, vast regions, and even through devastating crises. You start with a pile of petitions from provincial magistrates. They're asking for clarification on tax exemptions or reporting land disputes between neighboring villages. Each document is sealed with a small dab of wax. Some seals are cracked and damaged from their long journey, while others look as if they were just pressed. You pick one up and examine the seal, comparing the impression to the reference guides on your desk. This one is a little blurry. Maybe it was pressed at an odd angle or bumped around during travel. You make a small note in your catalog. Intact? Yes. Impression clear. Partial. Every detail matters. Next, you move on to a set of letters from distant allies. The tone shifts dramatically. Some are warm and friendly, full of praise for the emperor. Others are layered with diplomatic tension, the compliments feeling more like formalities than genuine sentiment. The language is incredibly formal, almost theatrical, with grand opening blessings and solemn closing invocations. Your task is to transcribe these letters into the central ledger, making sure to copy the phrasing exactly. Even a subtle change in wording could have huge consequences. A misplaced verb might unintentionally insult a powerful king or a trusted general, sparking a conflict that could have been easily avoided. Accuracy is everything. As you're flipping through a particularly ornate dispatch, a quirky detail catches your eye. The sender, a clerk stationed halfway across the empire, has drawn tiny ships in the margins of the letter. Each ship is tilted at a precarious angle, as if caught in a violent storm. You wonder about the artist. Was this just a decorative flourish? Was it meant to be instructive, a visual metaphor for the turbulent political situation being described in the letter? Or was it simply the product of boredom, a way to pass the time during a long, uneventful day? It's impossible to know for sure, but it's a powerful reminder that even in the most official documents, the human touch is always present. After transcribing, you begin the cross-referencing process. Each new entry has to be connected to prior correspondence to make sure the story is complete. One letter you're reading mentions that grain shipments have been delayed because of a river flooding. You pull out previous reports from that region, comparing the dates and details. You note the consistency of the complaint and check if any adjustments were made to the supply schedules in response. This part of the job is crucial. A misalignment in the records could mean resources being sent to the wrong place, or it could escalate political tensions if one province feels its needs are being ignored. It's fascinating to think about how Byzantine officials actually used this information. Historians still debate whether they relied more on their own memories or strictly on the documentation. There's some evidence that senior administrators had an incredible mental grasp of regional affairs, able to recall details from years ago without consulting the archives. But there's also plenty of evidence that emphasizes their reliance on painstakingly maintained records, just like the ones you're organizing now. You marvel at how both approaches could coexist, a blend of human memory and recorded fact. By mid-afternoon, you reach a stack of petitions from ordinary citizens. There are letters from merchants, minor officials, and even monks. They're asking for tax relief, appealing legal judgments, or simply lodging a complaint. The tone varies wildly from one document to the next. Some are polite and deferential, others are filled with anxiety, and a few are even vaguely threatening. Each one must be noted, filed, and occasionally annotated with a recommendation for action. It's a testament to the sheer scale of the bureaucracy, its ability to absorb countless individual voices and integrate them into the vast machinery of the empire. In a corner of the room, you find a small box filled with fragments of older correspondence. These documents have been damaged by moisture or simply the passage of time. Some of the notes are written in a form of shorthand that's difficult to decipher, while others are so faded they're nearly illegible. You handle them with extreme care, preserving even the tiniest scraps of parchment. Historians argue about how much information was lost over the centuries due to this kind of damage, and how much was saved thanks to scrupulous copying and preservation efforts. Each fragment you touch feels like a piece of a living memory, a connection to a past that is constantly in danger of being forgotten. By the end of the day, you've cataloged dozens of documents. Each one has been tied with cord, labeled with its contents, and stored according to a strict hierarchical system. The archive isn't just a storage facility, it's a living network of information. Each document connects to past decisions, current operations, and future consequences. It's the empire's memory made tangible. You pause for a moment, looking at the orderly rows of bundles that now line the shelves. The faint scent of wax and old parchment fills the air. You realize that somewhere in these stacks are the records of entire military campaigns, heated tax disputes, delicate diplomatic negotiations, and the everyday grievances of people who lived and died centuries ago. All of it preserved, all of it accessible, and all of it dependent on the meticulous care of people like you. As you finally leave the archive, the palace corridors echo with the distant familiar sounds of routine. You hear footsteps, muted conversations, and the occasional scrape of a quill on parchment. It dawns on you that even as empires rise and fall, as emperors come and go, these quiet chambers are what maintain the continuity. They hold the memory itself. And you, with your ink-stained fingers and unwavering focus, have been entrusted with a small but essential part of that continuity. One careful annotation at a time, you are helping the empire remember itself. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, please like, subscribe, and follow for more. Today, your assignment shifts toward the exotic and slightly ceremonial, the imperial wardrobe of official documents. You enter a narrow room lined with cabinets and shelves. Each drawer labeled with the tiniest copper tag, describing its contents with Byzantine precision. Some drawers contain treaties, others edicts, some even personal letters from high-ranking courtiers. The air smells faintly of old parchment, beeswax, polish, and something akin to faint lavender scent meant to preserve both ink and sanity. You're tasked with reviewing documents slated for public proclamation, ensuring that every decree meets exacting standards before it's read aloud or posted. Mainstream historians emphasize that public proclamations were more than communication. They were performances of authority. The empire carefully curated not only the words, but also the manner in which citizens received them. Historians still argue whether the visual and ceremonial aspects mattered as much as the text itself. You're about to see both in action. Your first document is an edict regarding the regulation of market taxes in the capital. You examine it carefully, margins measured, script aligned, corrections noted, and, most importantly, the seal verified. Even the smallest misalignment could invite ridicule, undermine perceived legitimacy, or be exploited by a clever trader. The weight of authority in wax is surprisingly literal. You feel it in your hands. Next, a colorful scroll arrives from a distant province, outlining new regulations for trade in silk and spices. You note the tiny artistic flourishes in the letters, the occasional extended stroke, a subtle cross-hatching in the margins. While technically ornamental, these flourishes denote care and respect for the imperial office. A clerk's pride manifests quietly, almost invisibly, in the flow of ink across parchment. You smile at the dedication required to make bureaucracy beautiful. A quirky anecdote from your supervisor emerges. An official once tried to improve public proclamation by adding additional flourishes and marginal drawings of the emperor on horseback. While artistically ambitious, it was deemed inappropriate and corrected. Some bureaucrats argue that too much creativity undermines the solemnity of imperial authority. You file this away mentally as a lesson in balancing diligence with decorum. Your task also involves verifying that all directives are consistent with previous law codes. Byzantine law was famously cumulative, with newer edicts layered atop older statutes. You cross-reference older regulations to ensure nothing contradicts existing legislation. Historians still debate whether the complexity of Byzantine legal layering made enforcement easier or created opportunities for misinterpretation. For you, it feels like untangling a vast web of inked decisions, centuries in the making. Later, you receive a bundle of petitions from artisans and merchants, each requesting clarification or modification of earlier proclamations. Some petitions are polite, others assertive. You review them meticulously, noting where the original edict may need elaboration or correction. Each document is carefully filed for consideration by higher officials. The empire thrives on responsiveness, even if slow, precise, and slightly exhausting. Mid-afternoon, a new set of ceremonial proclamations arrives, meant for upcoming religious festivals. The parchment is of the highest quality, prepared with extreme care. You inspect the layout, ensuring that lines align perfectly and spacing allows for legible reading to a crowd. Ink is tested for consistency, and even the anticipated humidity is considered. Historians still argue whether such attention to detail was primarily about practicality or spectacle. But you recognize the logic. An illegible decree in front of thousands is an embarrassment nobody wants. A small, humorous note in the margin of one scroll shows a tiny depiction of a dove, likely symbolic of peace or blessing, adding a touch of personality to otherwise stern edicts. You can't help but think that Byzantine clerks had subtle ways of humanizing even the most formal bureaucracy. Humor survives in the smallest details, even when authority demands solemnity. By late afternoon, the stack of reviewed and corrected proclamations is ready for final sealing. Wax seals are pressed, cords aligned, and each bundle carefully labeled for dispatch to the appropriate offices or public spaces. The room feels calm, the work complete, yet humming with quiet purpose. Each decree now carries the empire's voice accurately and elegantly. As you leave, the sun slants across the palace floors, and you imagine citizens reading these proclamations aloud in marketplaces, basilicas, and harbor docks. Words carefully recorded now become public authority. Your hand has touched the instruments of governance, shaping communication across the empire. And in that moment, you realize how profoundly everyday bureaucracy, wax, parchment, ink, and patience scaffolds the grandeur of Byzantine power. Every careful stroke ensures that order endures. The following day, your duties lead you into the realm of fiscal correspondence letters and reports between the central treasury and provincial officials. You carry a bundle from the coast, scented faintly of salt water and dried fish. The wax seals are mostly intact, though a few show the faint cracks of travel. You untie the cords carefully, savoring the soft pop of parchment freed from its binding. Each envelope contains data, revenue collected, exemptions granted, and notes on local hardships. This is the empire's financial heartbeat. Mainstream historians note that Byzantine fiscal correspondence was the backbone of administrative control. Governors, strategoi, and tax collectors all reported through meticulously maintained channels, creating a network of oversight that spanned the Mediterranean and beyond. Historians still debate whether the empire's obsession with paperwork was truly efficient or whether it sometimes slowed response to urgent issues. Either way, without such documentation, the emperor would navigate governance blind. You begin by comparing a provincial tax report with central treasury expectations. Numbers align in most places, but discrepancies arise in two coastal towns. Olive yields are lower than anticipated. Marginal notes suggest a poor harvest caused by unusual rainfall. You annotate carefully, noting the variance and potential impact on grain shipments. Accuracy here as critical misaligned numbers can ripple outward, affecting military provisions and urban markets alike. A quirky detail catches your eye. A clerk has drawn a small ship in the margin next to one entry, clearly illustrating the route along which the grain was transported. It's subtle, practical, and whimsical all at once. You smile, recognizing that even in bureaucratic monotony, small touches of humanity survive. Next, you reconcile payment records for regional officials. Their stipends are accounted for alongside local revenues. The exercise requires cross-referencing, multiple ledgers, and previous ledgers, a painstaking process. You trace a thread through the documents, verifying that every coin is balanced, every disbursement recorded. Mistakes could provoke complaints, delay operations, or even stir unrest. You encounter an urgent note. A provincial governor requests emergency funds for repairs after a storm destroyed a small harbor pier. You log the request, annotate it for priority, and ensure it will reach the appropriate treasury officer. Historians still argue how quickly the central administration could respond to such emergencies. Given the vast distances and reliance on written reports, for now, you can only record the information with precision. Mid-afternoon brings letters from military units stationed in remote fortresses. They report supply shortages and troop morale issues, again requiring careful annotation and cross-checking with the corresponding treasury allocations. You pause to imagine a soldier counting rations under the hot Anatolian sun, while your pen scratches out his allotted support hundreds of miles away. The connection is strange, indirect, yet deeply consequential. A curious marginal note appears in one ledger, a tiny drawing of a goat nibbling on a scroll, perhaps a clerk's joke, perhaps a subtle commentary on bureaucracies, dependence on livestock, direct or indirect for revenue. The image lightens your mood, reminding you that even the most serious system accommodates whimsy. By late afternoon, your reconciliation work is complete. Every discrepancy has been noted, every urgent request logged, and every ledger cross-referenced. The bundles are tied, sealed, and ready to continue their journey through the imperial system. It is quiet, satisfaction, tedious, repetitive, yet essential. You've ensured that the empire's fiscal machinery hums smoothly, and that resources will reach the people, soldiers, and administrators who depend on them. As you straighten your workspace, you glance out the window. Ships glint in the Bosporus, likely carrying goods, grain, or correspondence that will soon enter this very system. Your hands have touched the papers that make distant provinces accountable. Your pen has validated the flow of coin, and your attention has ensured the integrity of complex bureaucratic networks. In Byzantium, power often seems abstract: emperors, generals, and councils. Yet it rests on these small, meticulous acts, sanitation by annotation, ledger by ledger. And today, as your fingers stiffen and the lamp flickers, you recognize that your quiet labor has helped maintain not just order, but the very stability of an empire. The week takes a turn, and my world shifts from merchant ledgers to the intricate realm of law. A fresh stack of petitions has just arrived from the city courts. Each one is a small, tightly wound scroll of parchment tied with cord and sealed with wax. Some bear the familiar crests of high officials, while others have tiny, intricate symbols from notaries I've never seen before. I carefully untie the first bundle, and the sheets unfurl across my desk. The scent is sharper than usual. Today, a potent, earthy mix of fresh ink, aged dust, and the faint human scent of the scribes who carried these documents across provinces. Today, I'm not just a clerk. I'm an explorer, charting the labyrinthine world of Byzantine civic disputes. Historians tell us the empire's legal system was a sprawling, multi-layered beast. It was built on centuries of Roman tradition, then refined by emperors like Justinian and Leo III. From grand imperial constitutions down to local edicts like the Ecloga, the law aimed to cover every imaginable aspect of life. There were rules for property rights, inheritance, commerce, and even for things as mundane as who gets to use the water from a shared stream. Scholars still debate whether this system was a tool of oppression or a framework for a just and orderly society. But for me, sitting here with this pile of parchment, the question is much more immediate. My job is to log, categorize, and summarize each petition with absolute accuracy, preparing them for the eyes of the magistrates and secretaries who will pass judgment. The weight of their decisions rests on the clarity of my work. My first petition is a classic neighborhood squabble. It's a civil dispute between two olive growers. They're arguing over a boundary line and access to a shared irrigation channel. The clerk who drafted the document even included diagrams. They're roughly drawn, but clear enough. I can see the plots of land, the little squiggly lines representing water channels, and even a few landmarks like an old stone wall and a prominent tree. I take out a fresh sheet of parchment and carefully transcribe each drawing, noting the dimensions and all the annotations. Precision is everything here. A single misplaced line in my copy could unfairly favor one farmer over the other. It feels like I'm dispensing a tiny bureaucratic form of justice right here at my desk. Next up, a different kind of problem. This petition is from a merchant. He claims the customs duties he paid at a major port were calculated incorrectly. This sends me back to the commercial ledgers I was working on just a few days ago. I pull them out, the heavy books thudding onto the table. I find the corresponding entry and pause, my finger tracing each line of numbers, cross-referencing the merchant's claim with our official records. I meticulously check the addition, the subtractions, the percentages. It's slow work. Even a single misread numeral could have huge consequences. It could mean the state loses revenue, or it could mean this merchant is unfairly burdened, breeding resentment that could bubble up later. Historians argue about how often simple clerical errors like this caused major disputes in the empire. Right now, my careful attention is the only thing standing between a simple mistake and a potential crisis. As I'm deep in these numbers, a quirky little detail in the margin of the merchant's petition catches my eye, next to a line describing a particularly difficult negotiation. Someone, probably the original scribe, has drawn a tiny stick figure. The figure has its arms thrown up in the air, a perfect little sketch of pure exasperation. I can't help but let out a quiet chuckle. It's a reminder that even in the most formal and serious of settings, a sense of humor finds a way to survive. Bureaucracy might be a deadly serious business, but humanity always finds a way to peek through the cracks, even if it's just in the margins of a legal document. I set the merchant-esque case aside and move on to a thick bundle of documents all concerning property inheritance. This is where the language gets really dense. It's formal, precise, and packed with legal jargon that takes all my concentration to decipher. I read slowly, making annotations as I go. Who inherits the vineyard? Who gets the house in the city? Are there any outstanding debts or prior claims on the estate? Byzantine inheritance law was notoriously complicated. You had to account for multiple heirs, dowries promised decades ago, and obligations passed down through generations. A single misclassification here, a single overlooked detail, could spark a family feud that lasts for years. My pen moves with a deliberate, almost meditative rhythm as I trace the intricate web of relationships and obligations that bind these families together. By mid-afternoon, I reach the petitions dealing with minor criminal matters. These are reports of theft, trespassing, or public disorder. A baker accusing his neighbor of stealing flour, a dispute over a loud party that went on too late. Each document is logged and given a preliminary assessment. I cross-reference the names and locations with our archives to see if there have been prior incidents. Accuracy is key to ensuring fairness, even if the wheels of justice turn slowly. True justice might be delayed until a higher court reviews the case, but my meticulous records ensure that when that day comes, the facts will be clear. Historians debate whether this kind of centralized oversight actually improved outcomes for the common person, or if it was just another layer of bureaucracy. From my perspective, I'm just trying to make sure everyone's story is recorded correctly. Then, a small, distinct envelope catches my attention. It's sealed with the insignia of a provincial governor. Inside, it's not a petition, but correspondence. The governor is reporting on local unrest in his region and requesting imperial mediation. The report is concise, but every word is heavy with meaning. He describes underlying tensions between different groups, disputed land claims, and the potential for these simmering conflicts to erupt into violence. I annotate it with extreme care, highlighting the key points to ensure that the Emperor's advisors will have a complete and nuanced understanding of the situation. In this way, the bureaucracy I'm a part of isn't just about recording disputes, it's about mitigating chaos before it can escalate. My ink and parchment are tools of peace. By the time the late afternoon sun casts long shadows across my desk, I've processed dozens of petitions. Each one has been transcribed, summarized, organized, and carefully bundled. They're all labeled and filed, ready for the magistrates and imperial secretaries who will take the next step. I lean back in my chair, the wood groaning in protest. There's a subtle but deep satisfaction in this moment, the feeling of bringing order out of chaos, of turning a messy pile of human problems into a neat, organized system. In the Byzantine Empire, the law is only as powerful and as fair as the diligence of the clerks who serve it. Outside my window, I can hear the hum of Constantinople. Vendors are calling out their final sales of the day. The iron-shod hooves of horses are clattering on the cobbled streets, and the joyful shouts of children echo from a nearby fountain. It's a city teeming with life, with all its beauty and its conflicts. But in here, in the quiet of my office, I've played a small part in keeping that life orderly. I've ensured that the disputes, both major and minor, are documented, traceable, and on the path to resolution. Ink and parchment have, once again, quietly preserved the foundations of civic order. I stretch my hands, my fingers stiff and stained with ink from a day of careful writing. And in this moment, I feel a profound connection to it all. These records I create aren't just dusty old documents noting conflicts. They are the very foundation for resolution. They are the first step toward justice. As the lamps are lit, their warm glow flickering against the stone walls, a thought crystallizes in my mind. In this vast and complex empire, justice isn't always a dramatic courtroom scene. More often than not, it's a matter of careful, patient paperwork. And I, a humble clerk, am right at the very heart of it. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the Byzantine bureaucracy. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more stories. See you next time. Another sunrise over Constantinople. And for me, that means another day with the books. Most people think of soldiers and emperors when they imagine the Byzantine Empire. But what about the people who actually paid for all that glory? That's where I come in. I'm a clerk in the Genicon Logothesian, the General Treasury, and my life is a world of ink, parchment, and endless numbers. My day begins not with a sword, but with a stylus. I head to my office, a small but organized space filled with scrolls and codices. The air smells of old paper and drying ink. My first task is to review the incoming reports from the provincial tax collectors, the praetors. These aren't simple receipts. They're detailed accounts of land, livestock, and households from across the empire, from the olive groves of Greece to the wheat fields of Anatolia. Each report is a puzzle. I have to cross-reference everything. Did the farmer in Thrace report the same number of sheep as last year? If not, why? Was it a bad winter, a wolf attack, or is he trying to hide a few from the assessor? My job is to spot these discrepancies. I check the numbers against the official land registers, the practica, which are incredibly detailed surveys of every plot of land, its quality, and what it's expected to produce. It's a huge responsibility. A single misplaced zero could mean a family starves or the empire loses crucial funds. One of the main taxes we deal with is the kapnikon, the hearth tax. It's a tax on every household, a seemingly simple concept, but the reality is complex. I have to check the records to see who is exempt. Widows, certain clergy, and soldiers on active duty often had tax relief, but these exemptions change. A soldier returns from the frontier, a widow remarries, the records must be constantly updated. My colleagues and I are the keepers of this ever-shifting ledger. Then there's the land tax, the senon. This is the big one, the backbone of the imperial budget. It's calculated based on the land's value and productivity. A fertile field near a river is taxed more heavily than a rocky patch of hillside. My job is to ensure the assessments are fair and accurate. I look at reports on crop yields, rainfall data, and even reports of locust swarms. All this information flows into Constantinople, right here to my desk, and I have to make sense of it all. It's not just about collecting money, it's about maintaining a delicate balance. Tax too little, and the army goes unpaid. Tax too much, and you risk a rebellion. We've all heard stories of tax revolts in the provinces. Lunch is a quick affair, usually some bread, olives, and cheese eaten right at my desk. There's no time to waste. The afternoon is for reconciliation. I take the figures from the praetors and compare them with the records from the commercial officials, who collect the kammerkune. If a merchant in Ephesus reports selling 1,000 amphorae of wine, did the vineyard that supplied him pay the appropriate land tax on the grapes? It's like being a detective. I follow a trail of numbers that stretches across the entire empire. Sometimes, a provincial official will visit. They bring their own records, and we spend hours, sometimes days, going over them line by line. These meetings can be tense. A discrepancy could mean anything from a simple mistake to outright corruption. If I suspect fraud, I have to report it to my superior, the logothete of the genicon. The consequences for a corrupt official are severe. The integrity of the system and the stability of the empire depends on our vigilance. One of the most interesting parts of my job is dealing with taxes in kind. Not everyone pays in gold, numismata. Many farmers pay with a portion of their harvest. So, I'm not just tracking coins, I'm tracking grain, wine, and olive oil. These goods are stored in state granaries and warehouses. My records help manage this vast logistical network. The grain I account for today might feed the army on the Danube next month, or be distributed to the citizens of Constantinople during a shortage. When you see the bread dole in the capital, you're seeing the result of our work. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the city, I start to close my books for the day. My fingers are stained with ink, and my eyes are tired from staring at tiny script on parchment. I carefully stack the completed scrolls and prepare my workspace for tomorrow. It's meticulous, repetitive work. But as I walk home past the magnificent Hagia Sophia and the bustling markets, I feel a sense of purpose. My work isn't glamorous. No one will ever write poems about my skill with an abacus or my ability to reconcile a ledger. But I know that the legions guarding the frontiers, the diplomats negotiating treaties, and the builders raising magnificent churches all depend on the steady flow of revenue that I help manage. The Byzantine Empire isn't just held together by walls and armies. It's held together by threads of ink on parchment, by the careful, tireless work of people like me. We are the silent gears in the grand machine of the empire, ensuring that the sun continues to rise on Roman civilization. Every coin counted, every bushel of wheat tallied, is a small act of service to the emperor and to God. It is a vital, if unseen, contribution to the enduring power of Byzantium. And tomorrow, I will be back at my desk, ready to do it all over again. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this glimpse into the past, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from history. It's the middle of the week, and my focus has shifted from the endless columns of tax ledgers to something entirely different, ceremonial records. It's a curious mix, really. Part pageantry, part protocol, all meticulously documented in ink. I'm holding a set of documents detailing imperial ceremonies, religious processions, and public rituals. The stack is physically lighter than the financial records, yet it feels so much heavier. These aren't just papers, they are the blueprints of spectacle, the formal choreography of authority itself. As I untie the cords holding them together, a faint, sweet aroma of incense, a ghost from some long-past event, mingles with the familiar scent of parchment and ink. It's like opening a time capsule. Mainstream historians will tell you that Byzantine ceremonial wasn't just for show. It was an integral part of governance. Emperors demonstrated their power, not just through laws and military might, but through these carefully orchestrated rituals that reinforced hierarchy and demanded loyalty. But their essay debate that still rages among scholars: were these ceremonies genuine expressions of divine authority? Or were they just sophisticated theater designed to awe and impress everyone from local subjects to visiting foreign dignitaries? It's a fascinating question. With that in mind, I flip open the first document, ready to step carefully into this world of interpretation and record-keeping. The very first protocol I encounter details the annual reception of envoys from the Bulgarian court. The level of detail is staggering. It dictates exactly where each official must stand, which gifts are to be presented first, and even the precise order in which different types of incense should be burned. I begin to transcribe, my pen moving meticulously, noting every flourish in the original handwriting. A single misplaced comma could disrupt the intended hierarchy, creating a ceremonial faux pas that might be remembered and whispered about for decades. I feel a slight shiver run down my spine, a sudden awareness of the invisible weight of getting this form exactly right. It's a responsibility that stretches across centuries. Then, something unexpected catches my eye. Tucked away in the margins, there's a quirky little note. It's a small, charming doodle of a dancing camel right next to the instructions about positioning animals in the processions. I can't help but laugh softly to myself. I picture the scene: a clumsy, awkward camel trying to maneuver gracefully in front of a crowd of stern-faced nobles. It's a wonderful reminder that even in the most formal clerical traditions, a spark of humor can persist across the ages. This anonymous scribe from the past suddenly feels very human, very real. Next, I turn my attention to a set of documents detailing the Patriarch's grand annual entry into the great church. These pages are filled with seating arrangements, specific prayers that must be recited, and the exact order of gifts to be presented by the various city guilds. Accuracy here is absolutely paramount. Any deviation from the prescribed order could be seen as an insult to the powerful clergy or a disruption to the carefully maintained social and religious hierarchy. So, I annotate with extreme care, ensuring that every ceremonial gesture I record aligns perfectly with both established tradition and the records from previous years. It's like solving a complex puzzle where every piece must fit perfectly. This brings up another point of historical debate. How rigidly were these ceremonial scripts actually enforced in practice? Some historians suggest that minor improvisations were common, allowing for a certain degree of flexibility. Others argue that officials were strictly bound to the written instructions, with no room for error or personal interpretation. As I transcribe, I realize that every gesture, every line of text, represents a bridge between theory and practice, between perfect order and messy human performance. These documents aren't just instructions, they are the meeting point of ideal and reality. A stack of festival proclamations comes next. These are official notices for the public, instructing citizens on days of fasting, upcoming feasts, and market closures during major religious holidays. My task is to cross-reference these with the schedules from previous years, noting any variations or special exceptions. This system wasn't just about organizing holidays. It was a way to ensure social cohesion, linking civic life directly to religious observance. It created a rhythm for the entire city, a shared calendar that constantly reinforced the emperor's authority through ritual and routine. Everyone lived by this imperial clock. As the afternoon wears on, I find myself working on records of court entertainments. These documents cover everything from theatrical performances and musical events to grand banquet arrangements. And, just like the other records, they contain excruciating detail about seating, guest lists, and the ceremonial roles assigned to different attendees. Historians still argue about the primary purpose of these events. Were they political tools meant to display wealth and power? Were they a form of genuine cultural enrichment? Or, most likely, were they a complex mixture of both? I transcribe slowly, aware that even a minor error here could be disastrous. Misplacing a noble at a banquet could be a grave offense. Offending a visiting envoy could spark a diplomatic incident. And misrepresenting the emperor's intended message through the entertainment could have unforeseen consequences. I have to pause for a moment and just reflect on the sensory dimensions hidden within these dry records. As I read, I try to imagine it all. The rustle of expensive silk robes as dignitaries take their seats, the thick, fragrant scent of incense and flowers hanging in the air, the distant, haunting notes of a lyre echoing through the vast palace halls. All of this vibrant, multisensory experience carefully codified and flattened into handwriting on a page. My pen can only capture the skeletal framework, the bare bones of the event. But in doing so, it preserves the very structure that held the empire together. By the time late afternoon, sunlight streams through the window. The ceremonial records are fully cataloged, ready for archival storage. I look at the neat bundles, each one tied and labeled. Each represents a blueprint of power, a guide for performance, and a detailed map of the social and political hierarchy of the empire. I straighten the stack, my fingers stained with ink, my eyes tired but still focused. I have a sense of accomplishment, knowing that these documents ensure the continuity of imperial authority, the unbroken chain of tradition. Outside my window, the city moves to its own rhythm. Its citizens go about their day, likely unaware of the incredibly detailed choreography recorded on these parchments, the script that governs the public face of their world. But in here, in this quiet chamber, I have translated that fleeting spectacle into a lasting record. Ceremony, just like law or taxes, depends on meticulous recording to survive. And for this brief time, I have been both a witness and a participant in that process. And as the lamplight begins to flicker over the organized piles of documents, I feel a quiet, subtle satisfaction. It's the satisfaction of preserving not just paper and ink, but the very pulse of an imperial culture. One careful annotation at a time. Thanks for watching, and I hope you LHL join me again as we continue to uncover the secrets hidden in the archives. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys into the past. By the following morning, your attention turns to military payrolls, a task as repetitive as it is critical. A stack of ledgers arrives from a frontier theme, smelling faintly of damp earth, leather, and sweat. Each sheet lists soldiers by name, rank, unit, and the amount of pay allotted for the month. You untie the cords and spread the papers across the table, the familiar inked columns forming a rigid, hypnotic pattern. Today, your pen will ensure the Empire's warriors are not only fed, but reliably compensated. Historians note that Byzantine military efficiency depended heavily on accurate record-keeping. Without precise payrolls, morale faltered, desertion increased, and operational readiness suffered. Historians still debate whether the system was always sufficient to meet the army's needs, or if soldiers often went unpaid for extended periods. You can feel the weight of these numbers in your fingertips. You start with the infantry units stationed in Anatolia. Columns of names stretch across the parchment, each accompanied by numerical allocations for coin, rations, and equipment maintenance. You cross-reference previous month records, noting any discrepancies, missing names, repeated entries, or unusually large payments. Each anomaly is annotated carefully, creating a trail for higher officials to review. Mistakes here could ripple outward, affecting loyalty, supply lines, and the stability of distant forts. A quirky note in one column shows a tiny sketch of a soldier juggling coins, a humorous reminder, perhaps of the precarious nature of PE and morale. You suppress a chuckle and continue appreciating that even in tedious bureaucracy, humor finds a way to survive. You imagine a young recruit on the frontier wondering if his coins were faithfully recorded back in Constantinople. Next, you review allocations for cavalry units. Payments are more complex, covering horses, gear, and sometimes fodder. Each entry requires careful comparison to prior reports. Historians still debate the degree of autonomy granted to regional commanders in adjusting pay. Some suggest that clever strategoi occasionally redistributed funds to reward loyalty or patch gaps, while others argue the central bureaucracy maintained strict control. Your pen moves steadily, ensuring nothing is lost in translation between province and capital. Mid-afternoon brings requests for extraordinary disbursements, repairs to fortifications, emergency supply purchases, or bonuses for valor. You annotate carefully, noting reasons, amounts, and any prior approvals. Even small errors could result in shortages at critical moments, jeopardizing campaigns or leaving soldiers vulnerable. You imagine a fortress along a riverbank, Its garrison awaiting supplies that you are helping to account for with precise strokes. The smell of ink is now accompanied by the faint metallic scent of coins stored nearby. You pause, thinking about the men whose livelihoods depend on these calculations. Payroll is not abstract. It affects the lives, families, and loyalty of the empire's defenders. A single misstep, whether accidental or intentional, could undermine months of careful preparation. A letter from a frontier governor reports an unexpected shortage in coin reserves due to delays in provincial shipments. You cross-reference treasury records, annotate the ledger, and prepare a summary for higher authorities. The system, despite its layers, must adapt to reality. And your annotations create the traceable chain that ensures accountability. By late afternoon, the payrolls are reconciled. Each sheet is tied, labeled, and ready for dispatch. Your hands are sore, your back stiff, but there's a peculiar satisfaction in order restored. Soldiers far away, facing harsh terrain and unpredictable threats, will rely on the accuracy of your work. It is an invisible yet essential contribution to the empire's strength. As evening approaches, the palace quiets. You glance out over Constantinople, watching ships slip silently through the Bosporus and lanterns flicker in the streets below. Somewhere along the frontier, a soldier counts coins. Unaware that your meticulous annotations have ensured his loyalty, his comfort, and his survival. Payroll, like law, tax, or ceremony, is bureaucracy's invisible scaffolding, and you are its steadfast guardian. The next morning, you are handed a bundle that smells faintly of ink, dust, and old wood, collection of port and harbor records. The sheets are filled with detailed entries, incoming and outgoing ships, cargo manifests, toll payments, and sometimes notes about weather or pirate activity. You untie the cords carefully, letting the papers fan across your table, and prepare to immerse yourself in the lifeblood of Byzantine commerce. Historians note that Constantinople's prosperity relied heavily on its control of maritime trade. Accurate port records ensured revenue from customs duties, regulated shipping, and maintained imperial oversight over commerce. Historians still debate how strictly these records were enforced and whether local officials sometimes manipulated them to favor friends or skim profit. For now, you are tasked with preserving the official truth in ink. Your first ledger lists ships arriving from the Aegean Islands. Each entry notes the vessel's captain, cargo type, and tolls paid. Barrels of olive oil, amphorae of wine, sacks of grain, and bolts of silk are recorded in neat columns. You cross-reference these shipments with prior tax records and port logs, annotating discrepancies. A missing amphora here, a miscounted crate there. Accuracy matters because misreported cargo could affect supply, pricing, and imperial revenue. A quirky note in the margin catches your eye. A tiny sketch of a sailor balancing on a barrel, perhaps an amusing commentary on the precariousness of trade. You smile, appreciating that even bureaucrats long ago had subtle ways of lightening monotonous work. Next, you examine a series of letters from harbor masters reporting delayed shipments due to storms or bandit raids. You compare these reports to previous records, noting which shipments are overdue and which adjustments have been made to tax and toll assessments. Historians still argue how effectively the empire responded to natural or human disruptions, given its reliance on written communication. Your annotations provide clarity and continuity. Mid-afternoon brings a batch of interprovincial shipping manifests. Ships traveling from the Black Sea carry grain, fish, timber, and luxury items. Each portmaster's report is slightly different in style, yet your task is uniform: ensure the ledger is consistent. Identify missing entries and annotate special notes. You imagine the chaos if any one shipment is misrecorded. A merchant arrives expecting payment that never comes. Supplies fail to reach the fleet, or revenue is mislocated. A letter tucked among the manifests describes a dispute between merchants over cargo ownership. You carefully log the complaint, referencing prior entries and ensuring it is routed for adjudication. Historians still debate whether most disputes were settled efficiently or if delays and bureaucratic friction often caused tension. For now, your annotations create an unbroken chain of documentation. You notice that some ships are listed with unusual cargo, exotic spices, rare silks, and even small animals intended for court display. You annotate these separately, knowing that luxury goods often carried special taxes or ceremonial significance. It's a subtle reminder that the empire's bureaucracy monitored not just commerce but prestige. By late afternoon, all port records are reconciled. Discrepancies are noted, urgent cases flagged, and each ledger tied and labeled for filing or forwarding. The room hums quietly with the energy of meticulous attention. The empire's wealth, movement, and authority flow through these pages. Without accurate records, trade could falter, tax revenue would drop, and imperial influence diminish. You lean back, eyes tired, fingers ink-stained, and imagine the bustling harbors. Sailors shouting, cargo sliding across docks, merchants negotiating. All of it is captured on the pages before you, now orderly and precise. Your quiet labor ensures the pulse of the empire's commerce, revenue, and far-reaching connections remain steady. And as the light fades through the high windows, casting long shadows over neatly stacked bundles, you recognize that even in this mundane work, you are safeguarding the lifeblood of Byzantium. Ink, parchment, and patience, these are the invisible currents upon which an empire thrives. By the next morning, your focus shifts to the empire's communication network, the imperial courier and dispatch system. A fresh bundle of letters arrives, tied with cords and faintly scented with the smoke of distant hearths and travel-worn ink. Each envelope represents a connection between the capital and far-flung regions, from the eastern frontiers to the Mediterranean islands. You untie the cords and spread the parchments across your table. Ready to trace the invisible veins that keep Byzantium alive, mainstream historians emphasize that reliable communication was central to Byzantine administration. Couriers, envoys, and written dispatches allowed orders to reach distant governors, armies, and trade hubs. Historians still argue whether the system was fully efficient or sometimes slowed by geography, weather, and bureaucratic layers. You, pen in hand, are about to ensure that messages remain intact, legible, and properly annotated. The first letters are routine administrative updates, confirmations of tax receipts, minor military orders, and reports on local infrastructure. You carefully compare each entry to prior reports, noting any inconsistencies. One provincial office reports that a bridge has collapsed. You cross-reference earlier maintenance records and annotate the repair request. Even small details can prevent larger disasters when relayed correctly to higher authorities. Next, you examine urgent dispatches from military commanders. One notes suspicious troop movements near a river frontier. Another requests reinforcements due to localized skirmishes. You log each communication, verifying dates, sender, and intended recipient. The clerical precision ensures that strategic decisions are informed by accurate information. Historians still debate how much autonomy commanders exercised before receiving central guidance, but your work guarantees a traceable record. A quirky annotation in the margin shows a small horse leaping over a hill, likely a clerk's humorous nod to the peril's courier's face on long roads. You smile, imagining the riders braving mud, heat, and occasional banditry to deliver these messages. Even centuries later, their diligence survives through ink. Mid-afternoon brings letters from distant trade partners, Venice, Alexandria, and the Black Sea ports. Merchants report delayed shipments, customs disputes, and occasionally, news of political tensions. You carefully cross-reference these with port records and treasury reports, ensuring that each note is logged and discrepancies flagged. Accuracy prevents both economic disruption and diplomatic misunderstandings. One particularly delicate dispatch contains instructions for a regional governor regarding a ceremonial visit from a foreign envoy. The letter specifies where the dignitary should be received, what gifts are appropriate, and how the governor should report back. You annotate with extra care, understanding that ceremonial missteps could offend powerful allies. Historians still debate whether protocol or substance mattered more in such situations, but you know that documentation preserves both. A small envelope from a provincial scribe details a misrouted courier. A shipment of letters intended for one city has arrived in another. You log the mishap, cross-reference the intended recipients, and prepare a note for higher authorities to prevent future errors. Even minor lapses in communication could cascade into misallocated resources or diplomatic confusion. By late afternoon, all dispatches are logged, discrepancies noted, and each letter filed in the appropriate ledger were routed for immediate action. Your hands ache slightly from the repetitive motion, but the satisfaction is quiet and profound. You have traced the empire's veins, ensured the flow of information, and preserved the reliability of orders across vast distances. You pause to imagine riders galloping across hills, merchants reading updates in faraway ports, and governors carefully following instructions you've meticulously logged. The empire functions because of these invisible currents of information, and your labor ensures that no message is lost or misinterpreted. As oil lamps flicker, casting long shadows across tables stacked with letters and ledgers, you lean back and reflect. Byzantium survives not only by sword or coin, but by the patient, careful work of clerks like you. Every annotation, every transcription, every check of ink against parchment is a small act of empire building. And today, you have been at its pulse. Today, your task drifts into the realm of property surveys, and land records a quieter, but no less consequential part of imperial administration. You're handed a bundle that smells faintly of soil, ink, and aged parchment. Each sheet meticulously records fields, vineyards, olive groves, and pastures, alongside ownership details, taxation assessments, and sometimes even notes about natural obstacles like rivers or rocky outcrops. You untie the cords and let the papers cascade across your table, ready to chart the empire one parcel at a time. Historians emphasize that land records were essential for maintaining economic stability and social order. The empire's revenue depended on accurate documentation of who owned what and how it was used. Historians still argue whether these records were uniformly accurate or occasionally manipulated by local elites. Your task today is to preserve precision, ensuring the empire's vision of property aligns with reality. Your first survey concerns a rural village near the Marmara coast. Fields are measured in modia, the ancient Byzantine unit of grain capacity, with each plot tied to a household for taxation purposes. You cross-reference prior surveys. Noting discrepancies, one family claims a newly cultivated orchard, another reports a decrease in arable land due to flooding. You annotate the changes carefully, knowing that such details affect both tax obligations and administrative planning. A quirky note in the margin draws your attention. A tiny cow doodled next to a pasture, perhaps indicating grazing land or simply the scribe's humor. Even amid bureaucracy, small signs of human touch persist. You smile and continue, appreciating that centuries later, whimsy survives in inked margins. Next, you examine a survey of vineyards in a more mountainous region. Each entry includes plot size, grape variety, anticipated yield, and whether vines are leased or owned. You reconcile the numbers with prior harvest records and local tax assessments. Historians still debate how accurately these surveys reflected actual production versus potential estimates, but your annotations ensure that at least the official record remains consistent. Mid-afternoon brings coastal estates with fishing rights. Each fisherman's claim is recorded, alongside access to harbors, boats, and nets. Occasionally, disputes are noted between families or villages claiming overlapping rights. You carefully log each claim, ensuring clarity for future adjudication. Even minor errors could provoke conflict or reduce imperial revenue. A bundle of land transfers arrives next, documenting sales, inheritances, and donations to monasteries. Each transfer is recorded with witnesses and signatures, sometimes accompanied by wax seals. You verify the documentation, noting any missing or ambiguous entries, and ensure they are cross-referenced with prior property ledgers. Historians still debate whether central oversight prevented fraud or merely recorded it. Your meticulous work preserves at least the appearance of order. A small envelope contains a curious note. A scribe has annotated a hillside plot with a tiny stick figure shepherd, presumably indicating pastoral activity. You chuckle, imagining the original clerk perched on a hill, pen in hand, observing the goats. Even mundane records carry traces of human observation and subtle humor. By late afternoon, all land records are reconciled. Every discrepancy, transfer, and annotation is logged, and each ledger tied and labeled for filing or forwarding. You lean back, fingers sore from careful writing, and reflect on the quiet power of recorded property. The empire's economic and social order rests on these documents, just as much as on law or military might. You glance out the window at the surrounding city, imagining distant villages and farmland, each plot accounted for, each household noted. Without this painstaking bureaucracy, disputes might escalate, tax revenue falter, and imperial authority weaken. Ink, parchment, and diligence maintain a stable foundation beneath the empire's grandeur. and as the evening shadows stretch across the palace floor, you recognize that today, through careful notation and attentive observation, you have helped sustain Byzantium one field, one plot, one margin doodle at a time. By mid-morning, your work takes you into the labyrinth of legal appeals, a particularly intricate branch of the imperial bureaucracy. A bundle of cases arrives, tied with neat cords and faintly scented with ink, dust, and the subtle temps of old parchment. Each sheet contains petitions, verdicts, and counterclaims, sometimes with multiple handwritten annotations in the margins. Today, you are the silent intermediary between litigants, clerks, and magistrates, translating human disputes into durable bureaucratic records. Historians note that the Byzantine appeal system allowed citizens, merchants, and even minor officials to challenge local decisions at higher levels. The written record preserved both evidence and the rationale for verdicts. Historians still debate how often appeals were successful, or whether the system favored elites over commoners. For you, the immediate task is clarity and accuracy, ensuring each case's details are traceable and consistent. The first appeal concerns a merchant contesting a customs assessment at a Black Sea port. You cross-reference the ledger of recorded fees, verify dates and quantities, and annotate inconsistencies. Even a small error could have significant implications: loss of revenue, legal confusion, or disputes between officials. Your pen moves carefully, tracking each number, name, and note. Next, you examine a dispute over land boundaries. A farmer claims that a neighboring village has encroached upon his vineyard. Diagrams are included, drawn with varying degrees of precision. You transcribe the measurements carefully, noting differences and highlighting areas that require judicial review. Historians still argue whether these disputes were often resolved fairly, or whether bureaucratic delay itself served as a form of control. Your annotations maintain impartiality in the official record. You chuckle quietly. Even in the most solemn legal matters, human humor survives, etched lightly in ink for centuries. Mid-afternoon brings criminal appeals, minor theft, property damage, or assault cases. Each record details previous judgments, witness statements, and corrections or supplementary evidence. You annotate carefully, marking dates, confirming signatures, and ensuring that each appeal aligns with prior records. Mistakes here could delay justice or provoke further conflict. Accuracy is essential. One particularly delicate case involves a monastery claiming unpaid dues from a nearby village. The petition includes elaborate statements of piety and historical precedent. You compare it to older documents, noting continuity or contradiction, and flag entries for higher judicial review. Historians still debate whether religious institutions often held disproportionate influence in appeals, but your pen ensures that the record reflects what was submitted. A small envelope includes reports from regional clerks about procedural irregularities, missing seals, illegible handwriting, or contradictory witness statements. You annotate these meticulously, ensuring that discrepancies are visible to reviewing magistrates. Even minor clerical oversights could cascade into confusion if not recorded precisely. By late afternoon, all appeal records are reconciled, annotated, and tied neatly in bundles ready for archival storage. Each case, whether civil, commercial, or criminal, is now traceable and accounted for. The meticulous work you've performed ensures that the Empire's legal machinery functions with consistency and integrity. Even if indirectly, you lean back, rubbing ink-stained fingers, and imagine litigants awaiting outcomes far away, unaware that a clerk in Constantinople has preserved the integrity of their appeals. The city hums outside, horses clip-clopping along cobblestones, merchants calling from stalls, and distant bells ringing. And as the last light of afternoon slants across the palace floor, you feel the subtle satisfaction of maintaining justice through meticulous notation. Byzantium survives not only through swords and laws, but through attentive hands translating human disputes into ink, paper, and order. By late morning, your focus shifts to the Empire's infrastructure records, an area that is less glamorous than ceremonial or legal work, but vital to the survival of cities, trade, and armies. A bundle of parchments arrives, carrying the faint scent of dust, ink, and weathered timber. The documents record roads, bridges, aqueducts, fortifications, and public buildings, detailing repairs, maintenance, and construction schedules. You untie the cords and spread the sheets across your table, ready to map the empire's physical arteries through careful annotation. Mainstream historians highlight that Byzantine infrastructure was both impressive and essential. Roads connected distant provinces, aqueducts supplied water to Constantinople, and fortifications defended against frequent incursions. Historians still debate whether bureaucratic oversight enhanced efficiency or sometimes slowed repairs through procedural layers. For now, your task is to ensure that every note, measurement, and instruction is precise, readable, and actionable. You begin with a series of bridge reports. Each entry lists the location, current condition, and materials required for repair. Some notes describe damage caused by flooding or landslides. You cross-reference prior maintenance logs and annotate any discrepancies or delays. One bridge has been partially reconstructed twice in the last year. You flag this in the ledger. Small errors in recording could disrupt trade, military movement, or emergency response. Next, you examine roads connecting the Anatolian hinterland to Constantinople. The entries are meticulous: distances, construction materials, and observations about difficult terrain. You verify that prior repairs match new reports, noting where gaps exist. Historians still argue how accurately these records reflected reality versus administrative aspiration, but your role is to preserve the official account. Your pen moves slowly, tracking every kilometer, every rock, every bridge post. A quirky annotation in the margin shows a tiny donkey hauling a cart over a rough road, ascribed as subtle nod to the real challenges faced by travelers and transporters. You smile, appreciating that even in dry infrastructure logs, humor persists in inked margins. Mid-afternoon brings waterworks reports, aqueduct inspections, cistern capacities, and minor repairs. Each note is carefully transcribed, ensuring future overseers can assess supply stability. One cistern's notes indicate a minor leak. You flag it for immediate attention. Water shortages could affect hundreds of households, marketplaces, and even military barracks. You also encounter fortification records, towers, walls, gates, and guard posts. Each report specifies which sections require repair, supplies needed, and whether local troops have inspected the work. You annotate each line, ensuring continuity with prior inspection reports. Historians still debate how effectively central authorities manage distant fortifications, given the reliance on local commanders' reports. Your meticulous record-keeping provides clarity for future strategic decisions. A small envelope contains notes from harbor engineers about the condition of docks and warehouses. Saltwater and weather have eroded some structures, while others have suffered minor fire damage. You log these entries carefully, cross-referencing with previous reports to track patterns of wear and decay. Infrastructure, after all, is living in ink, affected by both human action and the natural world. By late afternoon, all infrastructure records are reconciled, annotated, and organized for archival storage. Every bridge, road, aqueduct, and fortification is documented, ensuring that administrators can respond efficiently and maintain the physical backbone of the empire. Your fingers ache slightly, but the satisfaction is subtle and profound. Looking out over Constantinople, you imagine the roads, bridges, and aqueducts stretching through the empire, connecting cities, forts, and harbors. Your meticulous work preserves knowledge that enables movement, commerce, and defense. In this quiet chamber, through careful observation and notation, you sustain the empire's very structure. One sheet, one line, one inked annotation at a time. And as the evening shadows lengthen, you feel the quiet pride of knowing that the empire's roads, waters, and fortifications are not just structures in stone and timber. They are enduring because your careful pen has ensured they remain accounted for, maintained, and remembered. By mid-morning, your attention turns to the empire's diplomatic correspondence, a fascinating tangle of envoys, letters, and treaties that crisscross the Mediterranean, Black Sea, and beyond. A bundle of envelopes arrives, scented faintly with travel dust ink and the occasional whiff of sea air. Each contains reports from ambassadors, notes on foreign rulers, and occasional requests for clarification on treaties or trade agreements. You untie the cords and let the parchments fall across your table, ready to mediate centuries of politics with ink and patience. Historians note that Byzantine diplomacy was highly sophisticated, balancing intrigue, alliances, and ceremonial display. Maintaining accurate records allowed the emperor to project authority, monitor allies, and manage rivals. Historians still debate whether diplomats had more influence through personal skill or through the formal documentation that clerks like you maintained. Either way, your annotations preserve the official memory of these delicate negotiations. Your first letter comes from an envoy in Bulgaria, reporting on trade arrangements and regional security. You cross-reference prior correspondence to verify consistency. Dates, names, and locations are checked meticulously. Even a single error could misrepresent an envoy's report and mislead the emperor. You annotate carefully, adding marginal notes to clarify ambiguities. Next, a set of letters arrives from Venice, detailing negotiations over grain shipments and naval support. You note subtle differences in phrasings, sometimes indicating disagreement, sometimes compromise. A misspelled title or ambiguous adjective could be politically charged, so your pen moves deliberately. Historians still argue how much influence Byzantine scribes had on the interpretation of diplomatic language, and you can see why every mark matters. A quirky margin doodle catches your eye. A tiny ship with exaggerated sails likely ascribes humorous nod to the challenges of sea travel. You chuckle quietly, imagining a courier braving storms with these very letters in hand. Humor, it seems, persists, even in the most serious bureaucracy. Mid-afternoon brings letters from the eastern frontier. Envoys report on Arab governors, fortifications, and the occasional skirmish. You log each entry, comparing it to previous intelligence. Discrepancies are flagged for review. Accuracy here is vital. Misrecorded observations could result in delayed reinforcements or diplomatic faux pas. Your pen ensures that central authorities have reliable, traceable information. One envelope contains a formal request from a neighboring kingdom to ratify a treaty concerning shared rivers and trade routes. You transcribe carefully, verifying that all clauses align with previously recorded agreements. Historians still debate whether Byzantine treaties were enforceable or often symbolic. For now, your role is to ensure the record is precise, leaving interpretation to policymakers. A minor note reports a misdelivered courier. Sensitive letters meant for a governor have ended up elsewhere. You log the error, cross-reference the intended recipients, and ensure it is noted for correction. Even small clerical missteps could have far-reaching diplomatic consequences. By late afternoon, all diplomatic correspondence is reconciled, annotated, and ready for storage. Each envelope represents a network of influence, negotiation, and imperial oversight. Your careful work preserves both the facts and the nuances of international relations, allowing the empire to function as a coherent political entity. You lean back and imagine envoys riding across mountains, rivers, and seas, carrying your carefully preserved words. The emperor, generals, and provincial governors depend on your meticulous annotations to guide decisions that span continents. Through ink, parchment, and diligence, you are a quiet but indispensable participant in the empire's diplomacy. And as the sun dips low over Constantinople, you realize that even the grandest alliances, the most delicate negotiations, and the most intricate treaties survive only because someone has recorded, checked, and preserved them faithfully today. That someone is you. By late morning, your attention is drawn to religious correspondence, and ecclesiastical records, a domain where faith, politics, and bureaucracy intertwine. A fresh bundle of parchments arrives, faintly scented with incense, ink, and the subtle musk of aged parchment. Each sheet contains letters between the patriarch, local bishops, monasteries, and occasionally the emperor himself, covering doctrinal decisions, clerical appointments, and logistical matters like provisions for monasteries. You untie the cords and spread the documents across your table, ready to preserve the delicate balance of church and state. Historians emphasize that the Byzantine Church was deeply integrated with imperial administration. Clerical records maintained order, ensured proper appointments, and safeguarded orthodoxy across vast regions. Historians still debate whether the bureaucracy primarily served spiritual guidance or reinforced imperial authority. Your task today is to ensure clarity, accuracy, and traceability in this sacred paperwork. Your first set of letters concerns appointments of priests and deacons in provincial towns. Each request includes the candidate's qualifications, local endorsements, and sometimes testimonials. You cross-reference previous appointments and verify that no cleric is holding multiple offices illicitly. Misrecording could provoke scandal, disputes, or even charges of corruption. Your annotations preserve both administrative and moral integrity. Next, you examine correspondence about monastery endowments. Land donations, grain allocations, and financial stipends are carefully documented. You compare each report to prior ledgers, noting discrepancies and confirming compliance with imperial decrees. Historians still argue whether the bureaucracy sometimes exploited monastic resources or genuinely ensured fairness. But your pen creates a consistent, traceable record. A quirky note in the margin draws your eye. A tiny monk with a disproportionately large quill appears next to a donation report. You smile, imagining the scribe playfully acknowledging the challenges of recording pious generosity. Even in religious administration, humor survives in small flourishes. Mid-afternoon brings letters discussing liturgical scheduling and festival preparations. Details include the sequence of hymns, seating arrangements for bishops, and the timing of processions. You annotate carefully, ensuring consistency with prior ceremonial records. Deviations could provoke offense or confusion, especially when high-ranking clergy are involved. Historians still debate how rigidly these instructions were followed versus adapted in practice. A separate envelope contains a report on theological disputes in a distant province. Clerics debate interpretations of scripture, local saints, or ritual practice. You transcribe the arguments precisely, marking dates, participants, and any resolutions or pending decisions. Accuracy ensures that the central church authority can follow developments and mediate effectively. You notice a small doodle in one margin, a bird perched on a cathedral spire, possibly symbolizing divine oversight or simply the scribe's whimsy. It reminds you that even sacred bureaucracy is human, touched by personality and observation. By late afternoon, all ecclesiastical correspondence is reconciled, annotated, and bundled for archival storage. Each document preserves the empire's spiritual and administrative memory, ensuring proper governance of religious affairs. Your careful work supports both devotion and imperial oversight, a quiet bridge between heaven and state. Looking out the window, you imagine distant monasteries, bustling bishoprics, and faithful congregations, all coordinated in part through your meticulous annotations. Without these records, spiritual, political, and social harmony could falter. Ink and parchment sustain both faith and administration, and as oil lamps flicker and shadows lengthen across your table, you sense the profound continuity you've attributed to. Byzantium's spiritual and bureaucratic life depends on diligence, precision, and patience today. That responsibility rests in your hands. Imagine the might of the Byzantine army, legions of heavily armored cataphracts, disciplined infantry, and a navy that controlled the Mediterranean. We often picture their epic battles and glorious victories. But have you ever stopped to think about what kept this incredible war machine running? It wasn't just courage or strategy. It was something far more mundane, yet absolutely crucial. Paperwork. Yes, you heard that right. The unsung hero of the Byzantine military was its mastery of logistics, all meticulously documented in a complex system of supply chain records. Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of Byzantine military logistics. We'll explore how an empire that lasted for over 1,000 years managed to feed, equip, and pay its soldiers from the sun-scorched deserts of Syria to the freezing plains of the Balkans. Forget the clash of steel for a moment. We're going on a journey through granaries, armories, and the dusty archives of imperial bureaucrats. This is the story of how the Byzantines weaponized organization. So, what exactly did a Byzantine soldier need to march into battle? A lot. Let's start with the basics. Food. The staple was hardtack, a twice-baked barley biscuit called a paximadion. It was durable, easy to transport, and provided the necessary calories. Alongside this, soldiers received rations of wine, which was safer to drink than water in many areas, and occasionally cheese or salted meat. But how did all this get to them? The answer lies in a system known as the unknowna militaris, a tax levied in kind. Farmers across the empire would contribute grain, wine, and other produce. This was collected by local officials, stored in state-run granaries, and then transported to the army's location. This wasn't a simple process. It required a massive network of roads, ports, and pack animals. Mules were the backbone of the Byzantine supply train, each capable of carrying around 200 pounds of supplies. For a large army, we're talking about thousands upon thousands of mules, forming a caravan that could stretch for miles. The state's role was paramount. Imperial officials, known as legathiots, were responsible for overseeing this entire operation. Their records were incredibly detailed. We have surviving documents like papyri from Egypt that list the exact amount of grain collected from a specific village, the number of mules used for transport, and the rations distributed to a particular military unit or bandit. These weren't just simple lists, they were sophisticated accounting tools. They allowed the central government in Constantinople to track resources, plan campaigns, and prevent corruption. If a shipment of grain went missing, the paper trail could identify exactly where things went wrong. Now, let's talk about equipment. A Byzantine soldier was a walking arsenal. They needed a spear, a sword, a bow, arrows, a shield, a helmet, and body armor, like the famous Larikian. None of this was cheap. The state took full responsibility for arming its troops through a network of state-run armories, or fabricae. These were massive industrial complexes, located in major cities like Constantinople and Thessalonica, where skilled artisans produced weapons and armor on a mass scale. The records from these armories are a treasure trove of information. They tell us about production quotas, the types of raw materials needed bayern from the Balkans, wood for bows from the Black Sea region, and the distribution of finished equipment. When a general planned a campaign, he would send a request to the imperial government. The legations would then consult their records, check inventory levels at various armories, and arrange for the shipment of the necessary gear. For example, a campaign against the nimble horse archers of the East might require more bows and arrows, while a war in the mountainous Balkans would prioritize heavy infantry equipment. The records allowed for this kind of tailored logistical support. And then there's the money. Soldiers need to be paid. The Byzantine Empire had a sophisticated, monetized economy, and soldiers received a regular salary, or roga. This was crucial for morale, but paying an army on the move is a logistical nightmare. You can't just send a massive chest of gold coins along with the baggage train. It would be a prime target for bandits or the enemy. Instead, the Byzantines used a clever system of financial records and letters of credit. A general could be issued a document from the imperial treasury in Constantinople. He could then present this document to a provincial treasurer who would disburse the required funds in local currency. This minimized the risk of transporting large amounts of physical cash. The payroll records were incredibly detailed, listing each soldier by name, rank, and the amount they were paid. These records also tracked deductions for food and equipment and bonuses for valor. They were a powerful tool for maintaining discipline and ensuring fairness. The complexity of this system is truly staggering. Imagine a bureaucrat in Constantinople. On his desk, he has reports from a tax collector in Egypt detailing the grain harvest. He has inventory lists from an armory in Anatolia. He has payroll requests from a general on the Danube frontier. His job was to synthesize all this information, balance the books, and ensure that the right resources got to the right place at the right time. The entire empire's military might depended on his ability to manage these records effectively. This reliance on written records had another, perhaps unintended, consequence. It created a highly educated class of civil servants who were experts in administration and finance. These bureaucrats, though often looked down upon by the military aristocracy, were the true architects of Byzantine power. They provided the stability and organizational capacity that allowed the empire to weather countless storms. While generals won battles, it was the legations and their meticulous records that won wars. So, how do we know all of this? We are incredibly fortunate that some of these records have survived. Papyri preserved in the dry sands of Egypt, military manuals like the Tactica of Emperor Leo the Wise, and administrative treatises give us a glimpse into this hidden world. The Book of the Prefect, for example, details the regulations for various guilds in Constantinople, including those involved in producing military supplies. These sources paint a picture of a highly organized bureaucratic state that understood the fundamental importance of logistics. They show us that success in war isn't just about what happens on the battlefield. It's about the long, slow, and often tedious work of planning, organizing, and supplying. It's about counting every biscuit, every arrow, and every coin. The Byzantine Empire's legacy isn't just in its beautiful mosaics or its theological debates. It's also in its dusty, forgotten supply lists. These humble documents are a testament to an empire that truly understood that an army, as the old saying goes, marches on its stomach and on a mountain of paperwork. The next time you read about a great Byzantine victory, remember the silent, tireless work of the thousands of scribes, quartermasters, and logistics officials who made it possible. They were the ones who ensured the cataphracts had their armor, the archers had their arrows, and every soldier had his daily bread and wine. They were the masters of the supply chain, the keepers of the records, and the true unsung heroes of the Byzantine Empire. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of Byzantine logistics. If you found this fascinating, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the hidden corners of history. Let us know in the comments what other behind-the-scenes aspects of history you'd like to see explored. Until next time, stay curious. By late morning, your attention turns to census records, the bureaucratic labyrinth measuring the empire's human pulse. A bundle arrives, faintly scented with ink, parchment, and the lingering aroma of tobacco smoke from the last clerk who handled it. Each sheet lists households, residents, occupations, property holdings, and even occasional notes on age, health, or marital status. You untie the cords and spread the papers across your table, ready to transform the sprawling lives of citizens into neat, traceable inked records. Historians emphasize that Byzantine censuses were critical for taxation, conscription, and social planning. Accurate records allowed the state to allocate resources, assess obligations, and maintain order. Historians still debate how comprehensive or precise these censuses truly were, given regional variation and local manipulation. For now, your meticulous annotations ensure that the official record remains reliable. You begin with a rural district near the Marmara coast. Each household is listed with members enumerated and their occupations noted: farmers, shepherds, weavers, and small merchants. You cross-reference prior census records, noting discrepancies. One family claims additional children, while another reports a lost household member due to migration. You annotate carefully small differences could affect tax levies, militia quotas, and imperial planning. Next, you examine urban census sheets from Constantinople itself. Entries are denser, often including shopkeepers, artisans, and minor officials. Notes about apprentices, guild affiliations, and temporary residents are meticulously recorded. Historians still debate whether urban populations were undercounted due to evasion or overcounted by clerical error. Your careful cross-checking preserves the official narrative. A quirky margin sketch catches your eye. A tiny cat perched on a roof beside a household entry. Perhaps a clerk's whimsical nod to domestic life. You smile quietly amid tedious figures. Small humor persists, a reminder of human observation in every entry. Mid-afternoon brings military-related census data: soldiers, their families, and servants. You reconcile these with prior payrolls and deployment records. One discrepancy notes a soldier whose household has grown, potentially altering rations and allowances. You flag it for further review. Accuracy here is crucial for both fiscal and logistical purposes. Next, you examine notes on foreigners and travelers residing temporarily in the empire. Merchants from Venice, envoys from Alexandria, and occasional mercenaries are listed. Their entries include origin, purpose, and duration of stay. You annotate cross-references to customs records, tax logs, and prior dispatches. Historians still argue how effectively these temporary populations were monitored, but your diligence preserves continuity. A small envelope contains census corrections, misrecorded ages, missing households, and occasional duplicate entries. You reconcile these meticulously, ensuring that every correction is traceable and justified. Even minor clerical diligence preserves accuracy and prevents future disputes. By late afternoon, all census records are reconciled and annotated. Each district, household, and individual is accounted for, providing a precise map of the empire's human landscape. Your work transforms disparate data into an organized, actionable record that sustains taxation, military planning, and civic administration. You lean back and imagine the villages, towns, and bustling streets of Constantinople, all represented here in ink and parchment. Lives, obligations, and identities are distilled into numbers and annotations, forming the quiet architecture of imperial order. Without this meticulous documentation, governance would falter, revenue would drop, and social cohesion would weaken. And as the oil lamps flicker against stacks of census sheets, you feel the subtle satisfaction of shaping the empire's understanding of its own people. In Byzantium, the pen can be as powerful as the sword, and today, you have wielded it with precision and care. By mid-morning, your focus shifts to correspondence and reports from provincial governors a domain, where administrative diligence meets the empire's front lines. A fresh bundle arrives, faintly scented with dust, ink, and the earthy aroma of distant lands. Each document details governance matters, tax collections, local disputes, military movements, and civic projects. Historians still debate whether governors exercised discretion or strictly followed central directives, but your annotations ensure that the official record remains consistent and traceable. You begin with reports from the Thracian provinces. Governors detail recent tax collection, noting both successes and challenges. Some villages report unusually low yields due to poor weather, while others note disputes among local officials. You carefully compare each entry with prior fiscal and census records, annotating discrepancies and highlighting urgent matters for review. Minor errors could cascade into delayed funds or mismanaged resources. Next, you examine correspondence regarding civic projects, bridge repairs, fortification, construction, and road maintenance. Each governor includes progress reports, material needs, and labor allocations. You cross-reference these with infrastructure records you previously handled, noting consistency or deviation. Historians still debate whether central oversight efficiently ensured project completion, but your meticulous work preserves clarity in the official record. A quirky marginal sketch captures your attention. A tiny goat wandering near a construction site, perhaps a humorous nod to rural realities or the unpredictable nature of labor. You smile quietly, appreciating that even bureaucratic documents carry hints of humanity and humor. Mid-afternoon brings military dispatches from governors on frontier provinces. Troop strength, supply shortages, and potential threats are detailed. You annotate carefully, verifying numbers against payroll and supply records. Historians still argue how accurately central authorities could respond to frontier reports, but your work guarantees at least a traceable chain of communication. One envelope contains a governor's request for additional funds to support grain shipments disrupted by flooding. You cross-reference prior records, noting past allocations and shipment discrepancies. This annotation ensures that Treasury officers can act with precision, maintaining both fiscal accountability and support for the affected region. A separate note reports minor disputes among local elites, property claims, market disagreements, and complaints about tax assessments. You record each entry, ensuring that higher authorities have a clear, organized record of civic issues. Even minor bureaucratic diligence here helps prevent local unrest from escalating. By late afternoon, all provincial correspondence is reconciled, annotated, and organized for archival storage. Every governor's report, request, and update is now traceable, providing the central administration with a coherent understanding of distant territories. Your work sustains the empire's cohesion, translating scattered local realities into comprehensible, actionable knowledge. You lean back, imagining provincial towns, roads, and fortresses humming with activity, all linked through the documents you've carefully handled. Governors, merchants, soldiers, and citizens unknowingly rely on your precise annotation to keep the empire functioning smoothly. Bureaucracy, often invisible, proves itself the connective tissue of power. And as evening shadows stretch across your table, you feel the quiet satisfaction of sustaining order from the edges to the heart of Byzantium. Through careful observation, diligent recording, and patient reconciliation, you have preserved the delicate balance of governance, one meticulously annotated document at a time. By mid-morning, you face the final bundle, the Empire's Archival Compendia, a collection of decades' worth of records, summaries, and reports. The stack is heavier than any previous bundle, smelling faintly of dust, ink, and the subtle musk of time itself. Each sheet contains distilled knowledge, fiscal summaries, ceremonial logs, legal precedents, military campaigns, and diplomatic correspondence. You untie the cords and let the parchments fan across your table, preparing to reconcile centuries of Byzantine bureaucracy into a coherent archive. Historians emphasize that the imperial archives were the backbone of Byzantine administration. They preserved institutional memory, allowed policy continuity, and provided evidence for governance decisions. Historians still debate how effectively the archives were used versus simply maintained, but today, your work ensures that these records remain accurate, organized, and accessible. You begin with fiscal summaries, consolidated reports of taxes, trade revenues, and provincial levies. You cross-reference these with individual ledgers, noting inconsistencies and updating annotations. A missing figure here, a miscopy total-their-ich discrepancy, is carefully corrected or flagged for review. Accuracy ensures that future administrators can rely on these compendia to understand the empire's economic health. Next, ceremonial logs arrive. Annual festivals, imperial processions, and religious observances condensed into summary tables. You verify dates, participants, and recorded expenditures against prior documents. Even small errors could misrepresent precedents or protocol, so your annotations ensure fidelity to historical record. Historians still argue how often ceremonial summaries matched actual events, but your work preserves the official narrative. A quirky note in the margin shows a tiny horse prancing beside a festival entry, a humorous reminder that even centuries later, human scribes found ways to insert levity into dry summaries. You smile, appreciating the persistence of whimsy across time. Mid-afternoon brings legal precedents and appellate summaries. You reconcile prior judgments, annotations, and petitions, ensuring consistency and traceability. Even minor clerical errors could have ripple effects in court decisions or administrative policy, so each correction is logged with care. Historians still debate the influence of clerks in shaping perceived precedent, but your diligence preserves an impartial record. Military compendia follow. Payrolls, supply chains, and garrison reports condensed into long tables. You cross-check them against prior ledgers, noting shortages, surpluses, or unusual patterns. Accurate archival summaries allow strategoi and legathiots to plan campaigns, allocate resources, and prevent mismanagement. Your pen ensures that centuries of military administration remain coherent and actionable. Finally, diplomatic correspondence is summarized. Treaties, envoy reports, and provincial intelligence condensed into reference sheets. You annotate with attention to nuance, ensuring that the summaries capture both substance and context. Misrecorded summaries could affect alliances, trade agreements, or border negotiations, so precision is paramount. By late afternoon, all archival compendia are reconciled, annotated, and organized for long-term storage. Each summary, ledger, and report now forms a coherent, traceable network of knowledge. The empire's memory, painstakingly constructed through centuries of bureaucracy, rests on the care you have taken. You lean back and imagine Constantinople's offices, far-flung provinces, bustling ports, and frontier forts all connected through these records. Administrators, generals, clerics, and governors rely on your meticulous work to preserve order, continuity, and governance. The empire's vast, intricate machinery operates because someone, somewhere, paid attention to the smallest detail in today. That someone is you. And as oil lamps flicker across the stacks of bound parchment, you sense a quiet satisfaction. Byzantium's bureaucracy, tedious and meticulous as it may be, sustains the empire itself. Every ledger, petition, and annotation you've touched contributes to the continuity, stability, and longevity of an empire that thrives as much on ink as on valor. The pulse of administration beats steadily, preserved by patient hands like yours. As the day softens into evening, you finally lean back, allowing your hands to rest and your eyes to drift over the tall stacks of ink-stained parchment surrounding you. The frantic clatter of pens and shuffling of papers is replaced by a gentle hush, punctuated only by the faint scratch of drying ink and the distant murmur of Constantinople beyond the palace walls. You notice the subtle glow of lamplight reflecting off the bundles, casting long, comforting shadows across the room, turning the once intimidating ocean of bureaucracy into a quiet landscape of order and memory. You breathe slowly, letting the weight of numbers, names, and dates settle like fine dust around you. Each ledger, each meticulously reconciled sheet, represents a heartbeat of the empire, the grain that fed soldiers and citizens alike, the bridges and roads that carried merchants and messengers, the letters and petitions that connected the distant provinces to the capital. Every tiny annotation you made preserves continuity, ensures accuracy, and, in its own silent way, sustains human lives. The grandeur of emperors, generals, and diplomats is meaningless without these steady, patient efforts behind the scenes. You imagine the countless clerks across the empire performing the same delicate balancing act, each stroke of ink building the invisible scaffolding that holds Byzantium together. Your mind drifts further, softening the edges of your day. You picture the sun setting over Constantinople's domes, the Bosporus shimmering like molten silver, and hear the faint laughter of children playing near the fountains, the call of distant merchants, and the gentle lapping of water against the harbor docks. Every document you touch today is part of this living city, breathing quietly through paper and ink. Even the margin doodles tiny goats, stick-figure soldiers, prancing horses become little whispers of humanity. Reminders that life persists amid endless paperwork. As your eyelids grow heavy, the room's quietude feels like a gentle tide, lapping softly against the edges of your mind. You sense the empire's heartbeat slowing to a lull, your own rhythms easing into its cadence. Ink, parchment, and patience have woven a tapestry of order, continuity, and memory, and in this serene moment, you realize that the empire endures because of countless small, unnoticed acts like yours. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the steady rhythm of bureaucracy fade into a calm whisper, carrying you gently toward sleep. The clerical labor of centuries, painstaking, meticulous, and profoundly human, lulls both empire and mind into quiet rest. You can finally release the weight of numbers, documents, and ink, allowing the world of Byzantium to settle, orderly and enduring as your own mind drifts into calm, gentle slumber.